Chapter 347. The summer afternoon was the most drowsy time of the day. A guard general walked down from the turret and slowly walked along the wide and straight alley. He did not have any attendants following him. Some of the soldiers and low-ranking officials around the turret followed his shadow, but no one felt anything different than usual. This corner tower general was Mu Fenyu. Just like the other corner tower generals, he was the highest-ranking official around this corner tower. However, compared to the other corner tower generals with illustrious achievements, his cultivation and past were extremely mediocre. Most of the soldiers didn't even know how he was able to become a corner tower general. Mu Fengyu's daily life was extremely monotonous. His residence was not far from this turret. During the day of rest, he would return to his residence to rest for an hour and then return to the turret as though it had formed a natural pattern. Mu Fenyu was used to leaving under the gazes of these soldiers and low-ranking officials. Thinking of the puzzlement of these soldiers and low-ranking officials, a hint of self-mockery appeared at the corners of his mouth. Of course, he knew why he had become the guard general of this turret. Among the dozens of turrets in Chongling, the turret he guarded was located at the center of Chongling. It appeared to be the center, but it was not near the outer perimeter or the imperial palace. It was one of the most unimportant areas. When this turret detected any disturbance, the other turrets would have detected it long ago. So this was where he had the least to do. The least to do meant safety, and not having to bear any responsibility. It also meant boredom. So like many of the noble women in Chongling, he even raised a dog. The dog was an ordinary black dog, but it was quite intelligent. It was very obedient and lovable. One of the important reasons he returned to his residence at this time every day was to prepare some food and water for the black dog and to play with the black dog for a while. Just like usual, when he pushed open the bamboo gate and walked into the courtyard, this grass dog with black fur that seemed to flow oil happily came out to greet him. It circled around him and jumped happily as it followed him into the backyard. However, the moment he entered the backyard, the black dog's head fell off. No blood was spilled. The black dog even maintained its standing posture. The wound on its neck seemed to be sealed by a thin layer of light film. Countless blood vessels, white bones, and flesh could even be seen. It was a disgusting sight. Mu Fenyu's body immediately froze, but his expression turned cold. He did not move and only sneered. "I do not know who you are, but you should know that if the primal energies of the universe here are strong, at least 3 turrets will notice." No one responded to him. Only the sound of soft footsteps could be heard. When Mu Fenyu saw the flash of white, his cold face suddenly changed color. He exclaimed in disbelief, "Bureau Chief Yi?" Yi Sealing held a cup of cold tea in his hand and stood in the shadows under the eaves. He looked at him quietly, still not making a sound. Mu Fenyu's body was instantly drenched in sweat. He forced a smile and said, "Bureau Chief Yi, what do you mean?" "In the 3rd year of Yuanwu, I found out about you. Starting from that time, I wanted to see you." Yi Sealing stopped looking at him and started to look down at the green tea in his hand. There was only a green tea leaf floating in the tea. "I had not thought that I would wait until today." Mu Fenyu sweated even more. His throat grew stiff, and he said, "This lowly official does not understand Bureau Chief Ye's meaning." Yi Sealing said in a calm tone, "If you had not sent false information and changed military orders, at least the Changmen army would have rushed to him. Even if he died in battle, he would not have died so easily. Who would have thought that a mere messenger would dare to open and forge a military order and kill at least 7 cultivators above Realm 7? Mu Fenyu's body trembled. He finally understood that the matter of the past had not been hidden from everyone. Even more importantly, you left me out of the forged military orders. A hint of self-mocking coldness appeared at the corners of Yi Seeling's mouth. Her eyelashes trembled. When I found out, everything was over, and almost everyone thought that I should have known. They thought that I was purposely leading the army to not move. Even Zheng Xiu and Yuan Wu thought that I stood on their side in the end. The pale Mu Fengyu knew that any evasion was useless. He laughed with a hint of madness and said coldly, "Since this is the case, Bureau Chief Yi, you should thank me even more. Since nothing can be changed, and because of my mistake, you survived and became the bureau chief of the Qin dynasty, then you should make the best of it. Not everyone can climb to your position just because they want to." Changing and forging military orders was not something that you could have done alone. There were more important people above. Yi Seeling did not look at his mad laughter. She looked calmly at the tea in her hand and said, "Tell me that person's name. If you are determined to kill me, what is the difference if I tell you or not?" Mu Fenyu's eyes narrowed, and he said, "I just do not understand. Since you have endured for so many years, why can't you endure now?" Yi Seeling looked up at Mu Fenyu. She did not speak, but Mu Fenyu suddenly thought of something. His voice grew strange. You are sure that person's heir?" Yi Seeling did not answer his question and said, "There is a great difference between dying comfortably and not. I know that you are one of the strongest cultivators in Chongling right now, but you cannot kill me silently without the 3 turrets noticing." Mu Fenyu forced himself to look calmly at Yi Seeling. "Also, I am just a minor person. I cannot understand why you would take such a risk to kill a minor person like me. You do not have any talent in cultivation and have just passed Realm 5. But you are a very smart person. Since you are smart enough, you will understand." Yi Seeling smiled and showed 2 faint dimples. "Because I know you should have a yellow rhinoceros horn." The yellow rhinoceros horn was not the horn of a rhinoceros, but a yellow spirit medicine that looked like a rhinoceros horn in the deep sea. This kind of spirit medicine only had one effect: to greatly increase the cultivation of cultivators below Realm 6. Yi Seeling had passed Realm 7 long ago, and this kind of spirit medicine was useless to her. Mu Fenyu's breathing stopped completely. He did not dare to believe that person had left behind an heir. "Since you are determined to have me die, then we will die together." Mu Fenyu naturally could not sit and wait for death. He opened his mouth, wanting to speak. At the same time, his vital energy started to flow violently through his body. But before he could speak, the tea in Yi Seeling's teacup was dry. The green tea in her hand disappeared without warning. Even the water in the tea leaf disappeared, turning into dry tea at the bottom of the teacup like a dry tea leaf that had never been steeped. With the disappearance of the tea, Mu Fenyu felt his skin become heavy all of a sudden. His body was extremely stiff, and there was only fear left in his crazed eyes. The sweat on his body was pulled by a powerful force and formed a water membrane around him. It absorbed the water essence of the primal energies of the universe in the surroundings and gradually turned into a transparent ball of water. He could not breathe, move, and even his vital energy and primal energies of the universe could not come out of his body. Yi Seeling glanced coolly at him. He was unable to move. There were no powerful primal energies of the universe vibrations. This little courtyard was very calm, as though nothing had happened. The ball of water silently swelled. Small cracks appeared in some of the water droplets. Small bubbles slowly seeped in and pressed into Mu Fenyu's lungs along with the water droplets. He was like a drowning person. His lungs were filled with water, and it was extremely uncomfortable. But his body received some oxygen to maintain life, and he would not die immediately. because of the unbearable pain. His face twisted and convulsed. I said before that there is a great difference between dying uncomfortably and dying comfortably. You have no children, and do not fear the revenge of some people. I do not understand why you persist. If you say that person's name, I will let you die easily just like your dog. Yi Sealing said these 3 sentences, and then looked at him and waited. Mu Fenyu's lips started to move. He could not make a sound, but Yi Sealing could clearly see what he was saying from the shape of his mouth. Even if you kill me, people will see that you killed me. Yi Sealing laughed again, so hard his chest shook. I did not kill you, Bai Shanshui killed you. I am in the Zhou family ink garden, right now. Mu Fenyu was a smart person, just as she had said. He thought of a possibility, and the last thread of hope in his eyes disappeared, leaving only terror. Chapter 348. The One Sky Water and Cloud Water Palaces method were the strongest water manipulation methods in the world. The One Sky Water was too hard, and Cloud Water Palace's method was more soft. When the two met, it was easy to create a scene. With Mu Fenyu's cultivation, he could not even make a sound in front of Yi Sealing. This was a person that Yi Sealing had wanted to kill since the 3rd year of Yuanwu. But when he saw the terror in the other's eyes, Yi Sealing did not feel much joy. The pain he was in now was not bearable, but Mu Fenyu did not speak that person's name. In the coup of Chongling back then, other than the present Yuanwu emperor and Empress Zhengxiu, there was another important person who had played an important role in the shadows. This person should have had a high status back then, possessed great power, and was not one of the present 2 ministers or marquises. This important person hidden in the darkness had gathered much of Yi Sealing's hatred, and was always a great threat to Yi Sealing. If entering Min Mountain Sword Sect and obtaining the heaven-replenishing divine art was the first step of Ding Ning's revenge, then Yi Sealing's first step was to find who this person was. What are you afraid of? Looking at Mu Fenyu, who was in incomparable pain but still unable to speak, her expression grew colder and colder. The smile on her face did not fade, but her 2 little dimples seemed to have formed ice. What else can that person threaten you? Is his threat more terrifying than death and pain? Mu Fenyu was in extreme pain. His body started to convulse, and he even started to lose control of his bowels. His lips started to move furiously, but Yi Sealing could see that he was only swearing the most vicious words. Yi Sealing's figure disappeared from the courtyard. The transparent water ball, wrapped around Mu Fenyu, did not dissipate. This hour had been Mu Fenyu's most leisurely and relaxing time of the day, but now it became the longest torture of his life. On this drowsy summer afternoon, Mu Fenyu slowly died in endless pain. Ink Garden was very quiet in the afternoon, but the alley outside the courtyard was very lively. Some shop owners gathered together to gamble. Occasionally, the screams and curses of some old women could be heard. Yi Zhongnen was practicing his sword in the shadows of his little room. His sword was very unique. Its entire body was golden, and the runes on the sword seemed to be folded in a strange way. But if one looked closely, the sword was abnormally smooth and straight. The folded runes seemed to be naturally reflected on the sword. His sword technique was also very strange. With every slash of the sword seemed to fold in the air, forming a series of golden ripples. He was so focused on practicing that he even forgot about the scorching heat. His clothes were completely soaked, but he suddenly had a strange feeling. He stopped and couldn't help but look to the side. He knew the source of the abnormality. That was where Xiao Sharon was sitting. Just now, Xiao Sharon glanced at him. Yi Zhongnen stopped. He thought for a moment, put away his sword, and walked back to his residence. Then he took a bamboo mat and walked towards Xiao Sharon. Then he laid down the bamboo mat not far from Xiao Sharon and sat down. I will not teach you swordsmanship. The moment Yi Zhengnen sat down, Xiao Sharon, who was usually as silent as a mute, spoke. The rejection of a person like him was usually colder and more hurtful than most people. Yi Zhengnen glanced at Xiao Sharon, but his expression did not change. He shook his head and said, "Elder is interested in me. Otherwise, you would not have watched me use the sword." Xiao Sharon shook his head and said, "Being interested in watching and being interested in teaching are not the same." After a slight pause, Xiao Sharon continued, "Also, I am a member of Min Mountain Sword Sect. If you want to be taught by me, you have to pass the Min Mountain Sword trials. You have not passed the trials." These words were more hurtful than his previous words. But Yi Zhengnen still did not feel dejected or angry. After a moment of silence, he said, "I heard that Elder is a cultivator skilled in killing people. I do not need Min Mountain swordsmanship. I only need Elder to teach me how to kill people." "You like to kill people?" Xiao Sharon seemed to hear an interesting joke and gave a rare laugh. Then he said self-mockingly, "Who likes to kill people? Killing people is better than being killed." Yi Zhengnan was silent for a moment and said, "My parents were killed by a group of bandits when they were taking me back to my hometown. I hid in the forest where the bandits lived for more than 2 months and killed 7 bandits. If I was stronger at the time, I could have killed all the bandits long ago and not been detected and captured." Maybe because he was reminded of similar memories, Xiao Sharon did not directly refuse this time and maintained his silence. Yi Zhengnan did not speak and just sat silently on the mat next to him. Xiao Sharon's eyebrows rose slightly, and he said, "Why do you have so many shadows when you attack?" Yi Zhengnan stilled slightly. "My sword is the shadow switching sword. The sword manual I cultivate is the fleeting shadow sword manual. The two are compatible." Xiao Sharon shook his head and said expressionlessly, "A sword with many sword shadows needs a sword manual that makes the shadows even richer and more unpredictable. That is what ordinary cultivators do. But to kill, one has to be different from others." Yi Zhengnan stilled. Xiao Sharon did not care if he understood and said, "It is easy to make a sword that can produce many sword shadows to produce more sword shadows, but it is very difficult to make a sword that can produce many sword shadows to not produce sword shadows. When other people feel that you have to be round, you choose to be straight, and you can do it." Xiao Sharon continued, "This is a good way to kill." Yi Zhengnan's eyes lit up with a strange light. He did not say anything and just bowed deeply to Xiao Sharon. At this time, Xiao Sharon turned his head. A black carriage appeared in the path he was looking at. The roof of the carriage was very round, like an enormous umbrella. Sensing the presence coming from the black carriage, Xiao Sharon's expression turned cold. But he did not show any intentions of stopping, and just watched coldly as the carriage drove into Ink Garden. Ink Garden was silent. Ding Ning had been quietly closing his eyes, but when the carriage approached the inner garden, his body uncontrollably trembled. He opened his eyes. Yi Xiling had finally arrived. The black carriage stopped at the gates to the inner garden. The astrology bureau official driving the carriage patrolled the surroundings. After making sure no one was near the inner garden, he bowed respectfully to the black carriage and then retreated. Ding Ning slowly passed through the courtyard and walked towards the black carriage. In reality, I like to be straightforward. I am not the person you are waiting for, but my arrival should be enough to say something. Hearing the soft voice from the carriage, Ding Ning suddenly stopped in his steps. By Shanshui? A cold voice sounded. Zhang Sun Qianxue appeared not far behind Ding Ning, with a frosty expression. "Eldest Miss Gongsun, we meet again. But this time, if you want to kill me, it will not be so easy." Mocking laughter rang out. The black carriage curtains were pushed open by a gust of moist wind. Bai Shan, dressed in the robes of the astrology bureau, smiled faintly as she looked at Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qianxue. Zhang Sun Qianxue did not like jokes like this. Her beautiful eyes started to show anger. Cloud Water Palace has always been strict with their methods in the past. I had not thought that there would be a day when they would meet Sky One Shengshui. Ding Ning said coldly as he recovered his calmness and looked at Bai Shanshui in the black carriage, as expected of Wang Jingming's heir. Bai Shanshui looked emotionally at Ding Ning and said sincerely, "If there is one person in the world that I truly admire, it must be Wang Jingming. Even the heir he found is unparalleled in the world." Hearing that person's name, and not just once, Zhang Sun Qianshue's anger and coldness surged in her eyes like a storm was about to erupt. Ding Ning turned to look at her, and then at Bai Shanshui. He said seriously, "If you want us to do something with you, at least pay attention to other people's feelings." "I apologize," Bai Shanshui said to Zhang Sun Qianxue, and then looked seriously at Ding Ning. She bowed slightly. "Mister, please help me save that person in the great floating water prison." Bai Shanshui was much older than Ding Ning and had been famous for a long time. To the present Ding Ning, she was undoubtedly a senior. Yet, she called Ding Ning Mister because she thought of Ding Ning as someone of the same generation and was extremely respectful. "That person comes from Chu." Before Ding Ning answered, she looked at Ding Ning and added, "He and you have met before. If he cannot endure in the great floating water prison, Yi Xiling and I will not be the only ones who know your true identity." "So Yi Xiling is one of us?" Before Ding Ning could speak, Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at Ding Ning and asked coldly. Ding Ning glanced at her. Zhang Sun Qianxue did not say anything else and turned to walk towards the room behind her. For her, since the result was already decided, what happened next was not something she needed to consider. "I came here. She went to kill someone. While I do not know who she killed, it must be for the matter of the past." Bai Shanshui did not look at Zhang Sun Qianxue and looked at Ding Ning. She said, "I did not gamble wrong from the start. She is a righteous person. Palace Master Bai is also a righteous person, not mentioning the lonely mountain sword horde and saving people in the great floating water prison." Ding Ning looked up, took a deep breath, and said slowly. Bai Shanshui smiled and said without hesitation, "As long as there is a way to save people, we can study the lonely mountain sword horde together." Chapter 349. For the entire world, the lonely mountain sword horde was of great significance. Bai Shanshui was especially famous among the cultivators who were enemies of the Qin dynasty because she had the lonely mountain sword horde, and not because of her identity as the master of Cloud Water Palace. Hearing Bai Shanshui's words, Ding Ning frowned slightly. He seemed to be thinking of something and did not immediately respond. Bai Shanshui looked at this young but exceptionally calm youth. Her eyebrows rose slightly and she said, "Do not worry, I, Bai Shanshui, always mean what I say." Ding Ning shook his head, looking at her proud face. He said, "Palace Master Bai is also a person of emotions. I am not worried about Palace Master Bai, but the great floating water prison is not as simple as Palace Master Bai thinks." Bai Shanshui laughed and said, "It is because I feel it is not simple that I have come to Mr. and eldest Miss Gongsun for help. The more cautious Mr. is, the more I feel this matter is possible." Ding Ning took a deep breath. Ever since Bai Shanshui entered the garden with Yi Xiling's unique presence, his mind had been in turmoil. He finally could not disguise his calmness, and his hands started to tremble slightly. "I originally wanted to save people from the great floating water prison." He looked up into Bai Shanshui's eyes and said, but if I want to save people from the great floating water prison, I need at least 5 Realm 7 cultivators. Bai Shanshui did not ask who Ding Ning wanted to save from the great floating water prison. She frowned and said, "Yi Sealing will not act." Ding Ning shook his head with difficulty and said, "Even if he does not act, he can be of some use. But even counting her, we lack 2 Realm 7 cultivators." Bai Shanshui grew silent. She knew that when Ding Ning said they lacked 2, he was including Zhang Sun Qianxue. While they lacked 2, there were very few Realm 7 cultivators. Also, this was Chongling. How could they find 2 Realm 7 experts who dared to rescue people from the great floating water prison? Must there be 5? After a moment of silence, she raised her head and asked Ding Ning. Ding Ning looked at her and said seriously, 5 Realm 7s is the most conservative estimate. Bai Shanshui laughed. Her smile had always been proud, but at this moment it was indescribably bleak. It was like a sunflower that had lost its golden color and was pale under the sunlight. "Sir, please think of a way." She didn't leave the carriage. Instead, she bowed deeply and said, Ding Ning was silent for a moment and said, "Unless we can find another one." Bai Shanshui looked at Ding Ning and said, "Just one more place, and we have a higher chance of success." Ding Ning nodded and said, "I'll think of something." Bai Shanshui smiled self-deprecatingly and turned her head slightly to look at the scenery of Ink Garden. She said, "There is something I must thank you for. If you had not poured all the spirit medicines Zheng Xiu gave into the ditch, I would not have come to see you so quickly. Maybe this is the will of the heavens." Ding Ning also smiled self-deprecatingly and said, "The will of the heavens is best at playing people. It seems you do not believe in the will of the heavens." Bai Shanshui laughed wantonly, and then her smile faded. She said, "Other than the lonely mountain sword horde and waiting, what else can I do?" Ding Ning thought and said seriously and directly, "Help me kill Liang Lian. It seems that General Liang is not likable." Bai Shanshui's expression was cold, and she said, "Do not worry, I hate him as much as you." Ding Ning bowed and said, "Thank you, Palace Master Bai. Right now, I live in Bureau Chief Ye's capital. If you want to find me, find Bureau Chief Yi. Today, I will return early to avoid inconveniencing Bureau Chief Yi." Bai Shanshui smiled faintly and said this. She flicked her hand, and a dark gold light landed in Ding Ning's hand. The curtains of the carriage in front of her fell down and concealed her figure. The sound of clapping hands sounded from the carriage. The official of the Astrology Bureau, who had been waiting patiently in the outer yard, quickly walked in front of the carriage and nodded respectfully. Then he drove the carriage out of Ink Garden without stopping. "What is this?" Zhang Sun Qianxue appeared behind Ding Ning. She frowned slightly, and her gaze landed on Ding Ning's palm. At this time, lying quietly in Ding Ning's palm was a dark gold jade seal. This jade seal was not complete and was missing several corners. There were many lines that seemed to have been randomly carved on the surface. Ding Ning's gaze had been focused on these lines. When Zhang Sun Qianxue's voice sounded, Ding Ning slowly turned around and glanced at Zhang Sun Qianxue without speaking. Zhang Sun Qianxue understood something from his gaze. Her frown deepened, and she said in disbelief, "The Lonely Mountain Sword Horde." Ding Ning looked in the direction the carriage had left and said sincerely, "The Lonely Mountain Sword Horde represents the greatest sincerity. But to put the Lonely Mountain Sword Horde in our hands before the matter is done, the legendary Bai Shanshui is very magnanimous." Zhang Sun Qianxue was silent. From the moment she saw Bai Shanshui, she didn't like Bai Shanshui. She always felt that Bai Shanshui was too arrogant. But now, thinking of Bai Shanshui in the black palanquin, she clearly felt Bai Shanshui's loneliness. Silence, but not turning to leave, meant the two's conversation had not ended. Ding Ning knew this, so he was silent and waited for Zhang Sun Qianxue to speak. You've already gotten everything you wanted. After a long silence, Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at Ding Ning and said. Ding Ning was silent for a moment. He looked up at her and said, In Chongling, some things are more important than these two. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked away from Ding Ning and said coldly, What is in the lonely mountain sword hoard? Very strange. Ding Ning's gaze focused back on the jade seal in his hand. He shook his head gravely. Completely different from what I imagined. Zhang Sun Qianxue said, What do you mean? Because a fragment of the lonely mountain sword hoard appeared before. You should know that there have always been two different guesses about the lonely mountain sword hoard. One is that this jade seal is the lonely mountain sword hoard itself, and the seal scripts on it are the best methods of the lonely mountain sword sect. The other guess is that this jade seal is the treasure map of the lonely mountain sword sect, and can be used to find the secret storehouse of the lonely mountain sword hoard. Ding Ning paused and looked up at Zhang Sun Qianxue. He said, Now the lonely mountain sword hoard is almost complete. From this, it seems to be a powerful method to use primal energies of the universe and hides a supreme sword path. But the feeling it gives me is not so. In the records, the sword skills of the lonely mountain sword sect are peerless, but the method on this jade seal gives me a feeling of insufficient killing intent, or rather, the killing intent is scattered. There is an indescribable feeling of great emptiness. Great emptiness? Zhang Sun Qianxue frowned and could not help but repeat. If the killing intent is not condensed, then it will flow everywhere. Unless this is a method to deal with an army. But facing an army is not a battle of one cultivator. There are so many powerful cultivators in the army, and they can be divided and stopped. Ding Ning looked at her beautiful and cold face and shook his head. This method does not have much meaning. Zhang Sun Qianxue thought seriously. She could not understand, so she was not willing to think more. She said, Won't we know if we try? Ding Ning looked at her with a grimace and said, Realm 7 is not enough. Realm 7 is not enough. Zhang Sun Qianxue had been preparing to turn. Hearing his words, she stopped in her tracks and suddenly turned to look at him. She said in a cold voice, You mean, even if a Realm 7 cultivator can comprehend the method on this, they cannot use it completely? Ding Ning nodded seriously and said, I am very sure. Zhang Sun Qianxue's gaze landed on the lonely mountain sword hoard jade seal in Ding Ning's hand again. She sneered. Then isn't this item only useful to Yuan Wu? Ding Ning sensed her meaning and quickly put the jade seal into his chest. He said, Do not have thoughts of destroying it. This is useful to us. In Chongling, where can you find 2 more Realm 7s who dare to oppose Zheng Xiao and rob the great floating water prison? Zhang Sun Qianxue did not linger on this topic and asked coldly. Ding Ning grew silent. Zhang Sun Qianxue sneered again. Fish market? Ding Ning took a deep breath and did not answer. Zhang Sun Qianxue turned around and said with a cold smile, You have already caused her to be like a homeless ghost. She finally has a place to live, but in the end, she is not at peace. Watching her leave, Ding Ning's expression grew determined again. He said, Fish market will be the last choice. Even though I never believed that Fish market could be at peace for a long time in Chongling, he added after a pause. Zhang Sun Qianxue did not say anything else to mock Ding Ning. She knew that Ding Ning was in great pain inside. At this moment, her heart was filled with pain. Chapter 350. Bai Shanshui was silent in the black carriage. Realm 7, she thought for a moment, and then slowly looked up. She said softly to herself, In the battle at the Wei River in Fish Market, the 4 orphan girls have been reunited. Now, even Miss Gongsun has appeared. Zhao Miao, where are you? Zhao Miao was fourth Mr. Zhao. After the battle at Fish Market, fourth Mr. Zhao's life bond sword had been destroyed and was missing, but Bai Shanshui felt that fourth Mr. Zhao was like her and would not be satisfied when he saw this majestic city of gray walls and black tiles. They had been opponents in a life and death battle, but when she thought of Zhao Miao now, she felt emotional, warm, and expectant. The caravan, moving along the Chu border, finally came close to the Yen. Because they had accumulated too much exhaustion, most people in the caravan were even more irritable. But perhaps because they were close to their homeland, the old man Zhang Yi had been taking care of seemed to be in a better mood. He did not make many demands of Zhang Yi and speak ill of him like before. He was mostly silent, narrowing his dim yellow eyes as though he was recalling something. When they could faintly see some villages on the Yen border, the old man seemed to become more spirited. After he finished the dinner Zhang Yi had brought for him at sunset, he gave Zhang Yi a rare smile. He seemed to see through Zhang Yi and said with slight disdain, "A young cultivator like you should not follow a caravan like this. You must have committed a great crime in Chongling, so you are using this method to escape Chongling." Zhang Yi stilled slightly and said awkwardly, "Mister, you misunderstand. If I did not commit a great crime, then why?" The disdain at the corners of the old man's mouth grew. Zhang Yi stilled. He did not know how to answer this question. The old man laughed again. "And you say you did not commit a great crime." Zhang Yi thought and said, "I offended an important person." The old man looked disdainfully at him and said, "You are a cultivator. You just offended an important person, and you do not dare to stay in Chongling. You are too weak." "I'm not afraid of that big shot." Thinking of what he and his little sect brother had done in the Min Mountain sword trials, Zhang Yi's face flashed with rare pride. "But my choice can make the people I care about live better. Sacrificing yourself to help others sounds great." The old man looked meaningfully at Zhang Yi and said, "Then have you thought about yourself?" Zhang Yi nodded seriously and looked into the depths of the Yen. "I need to become stronger. Only by becoming strong enough can I protect others." The old man smiled. Zhang Yi was looking into the distance and did not see that his face was very gentle, completely different from usual. "I'm sleepy. Help me get some warm water to wash my feet." As usual, he spoke to Zhang Yi as if ordering him around. Zhang Yi stood up and went to get some warm water without thinking. When he returned with a basin of hot water, he was stunned. There was no trace of the old man in his sight. Only the place where the old man just now was sitting had traces of burned charcoal. And 3 words were written crookedly. "I'm leaving." When Zhang Yi's urgent shout sounded, the old man, wrapped in the darkness, lightly moved through the wilderness. His body seemed to be wrapped in a ball of unique energy that caused his body to float over the long grass like a gust of wind. The wrinkles on his face were still there, but the feeling of weakness and age was slowly repelled by a powerful presence and disappeared from his body. Under a withered, old tree, there was a ball of red burning like a flame. As it got closer, it could be seen clearly that it was a fiery red crane. When the old man came close to the red crane, the crane spread its wings and flew up. The old man seemed to just sit forward and then sat on the back of the crane. Then, the crane silently flew up, disappearing into the clouds in the night sky. "I can see that you are a good person, but in the present world, good people may not be rewarded well." The caravan leader, Luo Zhongjing, walked in front of Zhang Yi, who had searched for a long time, but found nothing. Looking at the other's disappointed and worried expression, he said seriously. Zhang Yi understood the caravan leader's meaning and knew the other had good intentions. But he still shook his head and said softly, "If everyone thinks like this, there will only be evil and no good." Luo Zhongjing sighed and did not say anything else. From the initial confusion to the present helplessness, this humble young cultivator's actions along the way, and his meticulous care for the yen old man like he was repaying evil with good, made them feel what a true gentleman was. But could a true gentleman really survive in this world where the strong preyed on the weak? At this time, while Zhang Yi was worried about the lost old man, he was worried about the fate of this young cultivator who had won them over with his character. Ding Ning frowned as he sat in front of the table. The jade seal that represented the lonely mountain sword hoard lay silently on the table in front of him. Some lines circling in his mind perfectly filled in the largest corner of the jade talisman and perfectly connected with the lines on the jade talisman. Bai Shanshui's lonely mountain sword hoard was not as complete as his. But when his mind moved through these almost complete lines, the clearer he felt, the more Ding Ning felt that his speculation about Zhang Sun Qianxue was correct. When the power above Realm 8 spread out along these lines, and the powerful primal energies of the universe flowed through Changling, what would the result be? Ding Ning felt he seemed to have grasped the line that could lead to the true answer, but there seemed to be a last layer of gauze that he could not touch. It was a bit chaotic. There were sounds of bamboo instruments in the distance. Hearing the faint sounds of singing and laughter coming from the restaurant in the distance, Ding Ning knew that his heart was in a mess. You cannot do this. He frowned and scolded himself in a low voice. Then his expression started to recover its usual calmness. Since he could not think of a solution due to the chaos, he could only follow the prescribed order. Palace attendant Rong had always been Zheng Xiu's subordinate and had many new and old debts to settle. The former carriage driver, General Liang Lian, was about to leave Changling. Since that was the case, then he would kill palace attendant Rong first. Actually, following the prescribed order was often the easiest way for people to calm down. He put away the jade seal on the table and walked out of the inner courtyard. Then he walked out of the gates of Ink Garden until he came in front of Xiao Sharon, who was sitting cross-legged on the mat under the tree. He bowed seriously and said, "I want to kill palace attendant Rong." Hearing the words, Xiao Sharon's expression did not change. He looked up slightly at Ding Ning and said coldly, "The Empress will not give you a chance to kill her publicly, but you can kill her in secret. Then everyone will think that Min Mountain Sword sect helped me kill her." Ding Ning shook his head and said, "I want to kill her publicly as a disciple of White Goat Cave." Xiao Sharon was the cultivator best at killing in Min Mountain Sword sect. His ability to kill contained many layers of meaning. His previous words had clearly expressed a certain meaning, but he did not directly refute Ding Ning. He thought for a moment and said, "The Empress will not give you a chance to publicly challenge her and kill her, but you can force her to the point she cannot help herself. I want to know what she cannot tolerate." Ding Ning bowed to Xiao Sharon again. He knew that Xiao Sharon might not know, but Min Mountain Sword sect would definitely find a way. Chapter 351. Since I say you can force her to the point she cannot resist, then you can find a way. Xiao Sharon looked at Ding Ning and said coolly, "But she is Realm 6, and you just passed Realm 4. How can I believe you are not acting on impulse? If I force her to accept your duel with great difficulty, but you are killed, then I will not just lose some strength." Facing Xiao Sharon's doubts, Ding Ning simply looked up and met his gaze. He said, "I have comprehended the heaven replenishing divine art." Xiao Sharon's body shook slightly, and he suddenly looked up. Ding Ning calmly met his disbelieving gaze and nodded. Xiao Sharon frowned slightly and then suddenly laughed. "Such an interesting matter. I will first kill that palace attendant, and then try to kill Liang Lian and break into the great floating water prison. If everything goes well, we can leave Changling. This is my plan." Returning to the little courtyard in the deepest part of Ink Garden, Unlike usual, Ding Ning did not wait for Zhang Sun Qianxue to find him. He walked directly to Zhang Sun Qianxue's bedroom and said, "Is it really important to kill that palace attendant?" Zhang Sun Qianxue did not come out and said coldly, "With the attention of Min Mountain Sword Sect, what I need to do will be more difficult. If I want to do something to escape the eyes and ears of Min Mountain Sword Sect, I must make Min Mountain Sword Sect feel I am strong enough. I do not feel you can kill that palace attendant before Liang Lian leaves Chongling. If I cannot think of it, I cannot do it. If I raise such an idea, Min Mountain Sword Sect will definitely do something for me because I am a disciple of Min Mountain Sword Sect who has comprehended the heaven-replenishing divine art." Ding Ning looked down at the ground and said, "Since you bet Yi Xiling and won, Yi Xiling will start to do something. Since she has operated in Chongling for so long, what she does at the beginning will not be ordinary." There was no sound from the room. Other than Yi Xiling, we also have the Xie family. Xie Changsheng and Xie Rou will also help me, Ding Ning continued. So if we think clearly, our revenge will be faster and more hopeful. After saying all this, Ding Ning heard no sound coming from the room. He turned around and left. These were basically useless words in his usual conversations with Zhang Sun Qianxue. However, today, he deliberately looked for Zhang Sun Qianxue to say these words because he felt that Zhang Sun Qianxue seemed to be in low spirits. No matter what, he hoped that Zhang Sun Qianxue would be happier. But at this time, he, who understood Zhang Sun Qianxue very well, did not know why Zhang Sun Qianxue was unhappy. The moment he turned and prepared to return to his room, Zhang Sun Qianxue's cool voice sounded. "This is a matter of routine. Previously, you had planned everything, but because you were too worried about Lin Zhuzhou in the water prison, your mind was in chaos." He lost back then because his mind was in chaos, because he cared too much about the people around him. If you want to succeed in your revenge, do not repeat his mistakes. Ding Ning's body stiffened slightly. Zhang Sun Qianxue's voice reached his ears. "You must be cruel when it comes to revenge." If he did not care about the lives of those people in the past and planned before acting, he would have gotten revenge long ago. "If you do not want me to die, do not care about my life and death now and in the future." Ding Ning slowly bowed his head. He did not respond and silently walked towards his bedroom. The Black Astrology Bureau carriage slowly passed through the streets of Chongling under many respectful and complicated gazes. In the end, it stopped in front of Yi Xiling's courtyard. Wen Bai Shanshui passed through the quiet courtyard and sensed the movements inside. A hint of a smile appeared on her clean face. She did not walk towards the bedroom, but slowly walked towards the kitchen at the side. The door to the kitchen was open. Yi Xiling, dressed in white robes, was sitting quietly in front of the stove. "You seem to be in a good mood." Yi Xiling did not look back and said coolly. Bai Shanshui smiled slightly and said, "While the great rebel is famous, I have always been alone and have no support. Now, I am not struggling alone. I suddenly have so many friends who oppose Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu. Of course, I am in a good mood." Yi Xiling also smiled. From the side, it was possible to see the dimples on her cheeks. "It seems that you are in a good mood." Bai Shanshui pulled out a bamboo chair and sat down next to Yi Xiling. She suddenly smelled a thread of medicinal energy coming from the medicine cauldron on the stove in front of her. Her expression suddenly changed, and she lost her voice. "Yellow rhinoceros horn, ocean glass turtle dragon pill, sea subduing grass. How do you have so much?" Yi Xiling turned his head. Seeing Bai Shanshui pale, he felt proud. Then he looked at Bai Shanshui's trembling chest. He thought of what he had said when he entered Zhao Zhan's courtyard that day. He could not help but tease. Overseas women have large chests. I have been overseas for many years, but I cannot compare to Palace Master Bai. These words did not seem to match, but Bai Shanshui suddenly understood. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You have cultivated overseas for many years, fought beasts, killed serpents, and searched for medicine in the sea. You obtained so many spirit medicines, but you did not use them yourself. Yi Sealing smiled proudly. He still did not directly respond to Bai Shanshui's words. He said, "If I cultivate too quickly, how can Zheng Xiu not worry about me?" Bai Shanshui's expression immediately turned solemn. Previously, everyone said that Bureau Chief Yi was a rare cultivation genius in Chongling. I did not think so. I thought that if you received the personal teachings of that person, your cultivation was just so. Just now, I understand that Bureau Chief Yi deliberately controlled your cultivation speed. Seeing Bai Shanshui's seriousness, Bureau Chief Yi shook her head disapprovingly. Other than Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu, the true geniuses of the past have all died. This time, Bai Shanshui did not respond to her words. She frowned slightly and said emotionally, "You obtained so many spirit medicines in the overseas storm, but you did not use them. Previously, there was no news of the 9-death silkworm. That person seemed to have disappeared in the stories of your Qin dynasty, but you were able to endure. I rarely admire people in my life. Everyone says that Bureau Chief Yi has a small chest and a small mind, but today, I truly admire Bureau Chief Yi. Like rain after a long drought, once you receive the news, you are afraid that you are a part of the situation and will be affected by your emotions and cause problems in your actions. That wine shop youth is his heir, and everything he did before was strategizing, so I naturally bet everything on him." Yi Sealing looked at the boiling medicine cauldron as his smile faded. He said slowly, "Since you have seen him today, and you are not as obsessed as me, you must see more clearly than me. Why don't you tell me directly, is there a problem with my actions?" Bai Shanshui smiled and said, "I gave the lonely mountain sword hoard to him. Do you think there is a problem?" Yi Sealing stilled. "You feel that he has been cautious enough in the past, so you bet everything on him." Bai Shanshui looked at Yi Sealing and said proudly, "I bet everything on him because of other reasons. I feel that he has a true personality. When he received the lonely mountain sword hoard, he was not especially happy. He was always deeply worried, and this worry came from his concern for the safety of others." Yi Sealing was silent for a moment and said, "The reason he failed was because he was not cruel enough. I had not expected his heir to be the same." Bai Shanshui glanced at her. "That is good." Yi Sealing shook his head, but his gaze could not help but land on her chest. He couldn't help but think, this woman did not just have a large chest, but also a large heart. Bai Shanshui seemed to understand the meaning in her gaze. She glared at her and said, "Boil your medicine. If it burns, you will have wasted all these years of effort." Chapter 352. Min Mountain had snow because it was very high. In a green hall near the snow line, Xie Changsheng, wrapped in a thick green blanket, leaned against the window. As he craned his neck to look at the green hall and valley below, he muttered in dissatisfaction, "Such a cold place. Don't you feel you can set up a brazier and cook some lamb slices?" A middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator stood behind him. His expression had been unfriendly to start with. Hearing Qin Lai's words, his expression darkened. He said coldly, "If you want to be comfortable and refreshed, why are you staying here and not leaving? There are so many young geniuses attending the trials, those more difficult to heal than you have left, but you are the only one who does not leave." Xie Changxing turned to look at him and said naturally, "My wounds have not healed. What else can I do here?" Using the pretext of not recovering to stay in Min Mountain Sword sect, You spend your days looking around to see if you can steal anything. This middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator sneered. You were not able to enter the top 10 of the Min mountain sword trials. Do you not feel ashamed to stay in Min mountain sword sect like this? What am I ashamed of? Does anyone feel that my performance in the Min mountain sword trials is shameful? Xie Changxing turned to look at this Min mountain sword sect cultivator. Since you feel this place is useful, then it is skill to think of a way to stay for one more day. The middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator frowned slightly, his eyes filled with anger. But before he could speak, Xie Changxing said disdainfully, "Do not meddle. Geng Run and the others know my situation. If they wanted to drive me out, I would not be here long ago. How can I stay here like this?" This Min mountain sword sect cultivator was stunned and felt that Xie Changxing's words were reasonable. While Xie Changxing seemed to be too shameless, Min mountain sword sect had not given him a chance to formally learn. This did not seem to violate Min mountain sword sect's rules. Thinking of this middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator felt that sect Master Bailey Sushua had deeper intentions for allowing Xie Changxing to stay here. His darkness and anger quickly faded. His expression became gentle. He took out a letter from his sleeve and handed it to Xie Changxing. "Whose letter?" "It's Ding Ning's." "Ding Ning?" Xie Changxing's eyes suddenly lit up. He took the letter as fast as he could and opened it. After a quick glance, he couldn't help but laugh. "I was only worried that you wouldn't want it. Since you've already mentioned it, isn't it easy? Pen, paper." Then he waved the letter and shouted heroically at the middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator. The middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator, who had a slightly gentler expression, immediately had an ugly expression. This Xie Changxing was a junior and ordered him around like a servant. For this Min mountain sword sect cultivator, who was somewhat pedantic, this was disgraceful. "What are you staring at? You're not doing anything for me." Xie Changxing looked at his expression and shouted in discontent. "I am helping your Min mountain sword sect's genius disciple, Ding Ning. Do you not want the Guanzhong Xie family to do all we can to help him?" The middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator stilled. Then his expression grew serious. He nodded and said respectfully, "Yes, I will immediately prepare pen and paper." Regardless of what the outside world says about this Xie family youth, it appears that this Xie family youth will not lose against anyone. I wonder if this is formed or if it is a natural inheritance of the Guanzhong Xie family. Yantai Guanjian stood by the window of a green hall opposite Xie Changxing and could not help but shake his head. The two green halls were very far apart, even separated by a white cloud, but Yantai Guanjian was able to clearly hear the conversation between Xie Changxing and this middle-aged Min mountain sword sect cultivator. But this Xie family youth's comprehension is only average. I fear that he will not be able to catch up to those people in the future. Yantai Guanjian was an extremely noble cultivator, but inexplicably, he had a good impression of this almost rogue youth. He could not help but sigh softly. There was a young woman in green robes standing next to him. Naturally, it was Jing Liuli. Hearing his sigh, Jing Liuli glanced at him and said calmly, "Chongling has all kinds of people. Cultivators who know how to use the sword are not the only ones who have accomplishments." Yantai Guanjian could not help but laugh. He said, "This idea is different. In the future, you are suited to take over the position of sect master." Take over the position of sect master. Jing Liuli frowned slightly and glanced at Yantai Guanjian. He said, "In reality, I do not understand why Master always had the thought of giving up the position of sect master when he was at his peak. I do not know what he means." Yantai Guanjin stilled and was lost in thought. A moment later, he grimaced. I fear that no one knows what he means. I am going to Ink Garden. Jing Liuli looked away from the green hall, turned around, and said slowly. Yantai Guanjin looked strangely at her. What are you going to Ink Garden for? Since he proposed to force that palace attendant into a duel and wrote a letter to Xie Changsheng, this means that he is confident in killing palace attendant Rong and has already started to plan. Jing Liuli's glassy face reflected the icy light of the cliffs. With some indescribable emotion, she said, Even I do not have the confidence to win an expert like palace attendant Rong in a battle of life and death. A cultivator who just reached realm 4 has the confidence to quickly kill her. The process of such a leap in strength is a valuable cultivation experience for me. Also, I cannot have someone like him who constantly gives me great pressure. I have to ensure that before successfully forcing palace attendant Rong into a duel with him, he has the ability to kill her. Yantai Guanjin thought carefully. He felt that Jing Liuli's words were correct. The depths of Ink Garden were cold, especially in the small courtyard where Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qianxue resided. Ding Ning's previous conversation with Zhang Sun Qianxue did not seem to have changed anything. The air in this silent courtyard was especially heavy. Even in the hot summer, there was a hint of coldness. There was only a faint coldness in the courtyard, but in Zhang Sun Qianxue's bedroom, it was like winter. The curtains, the insides of the doors and windows, and even the walls were covered in a thick layer of deep blue frost. A blue-black longsword of extremely deep color that did not seem to belong to the mortal world floated in front of Zhang Sun Qianxue. This sword was extremely cold. The black frost energy that seeped outwards burned in the air like blue-black flames. Each wisp of blue-black energy seemed to contain many icy worlds in the perception of cultivators. The black frost energy on the blue-black longsword floated towards Zhang Sun Qianxue's body. When it came close to Zhang Sun Qianxue's body, it condensed into threads of black lines. Below these black lines, the deep red black ice worm kept its mouth open and greedily breathed. Its body was covered in a thick layer of ice. Its body was constantly trembling. It gave people the feeling that it could not withstand this kind of cold and was about to be completely frozen. But just as it was about to be frozen, as it was tainted by the thick aura of the ice, its body was changing slightly. Its smooth and soft deep red skin started to be tainted with blue-black color and grew rough. 2 small bumps appeared on its round head. Ordinary people could not see these small bumps with the naked eye, but in the perception of cultivators like Zhang Sun Qianxue, they were very clear. Sensing this change, Zhang Sun Qianxue's usually cold mind felt a hint of joy. The 9 Hell King's sword was forged from the nether jade of the abyss, and the nether jade was formed from the nether core of a kind of nether fish from the abyss. Even a cultivator of her level could not withstand it when she obtained a suitable method to forge this sword. She needed the help of Ding Ning's dual cultivation. Ordinary creatures, even powerful beasts from other cold realms, would not be able to withstand the energy of the 9 Hell King's sword, unless they originally had the bloodline of the abyss and belonged to that kind of abyss creature. Just as she had guessed, the black ice worms of Min Mountain Sword sect came from a similar abyss. There was a nether abyss in Min Mountain or Nether Mountain. Did the coldness of Min Mountain come from the height or from the cold energy of the nether abyss? As Zhang Sun Qianxue felt joy at the black ice worm's change and strength, she thought of many possibilities. Outside Chongling, on the banks of the Wei River, there were several huts of fishermen next to a wild crossing. This place was located on the river and was very high up. One could clearly see the borders of Chongling and the grand outline of Chongling, but it was outside of Chongling. In one of the huts near the water, a thin woman dressed in ordinary cloth robes was cooking fish soup. There were not many pieces of firewood in the brazier under the pot, but the flames were exceptionally fierce. Each cluster of flames was exceptionally sharp, like small swords. Ordinary, but contained powerful swordsmanship. She was Zhao Si, the strongest heir of the Zhao sword furnace, famous in the world. After the battle on the Wei River, she had disappeared, and the world paid less attention to her, because she had lost her life bond sword. The life bond sword gathered the life bond energy of a cultivator. After countless years of nourishment, it was more important than the arms of a cultivator. Once it was lost, its power would decrease greatly. Yet in this moment, Zhao Si, who was silently cooking fish, suddenly shook and looked up into the sky. The flames in the brazier in front of her burned fiercely, lifting the entire cauldron into the air. Chapter 353. After the Battle of the Wei River, she had cut off her connection with her life bond sword. She naturally thought that her life bond sword had been destroyed and become a piece of metal that had fallen to an unknown place. Yet just now, she suddenly came into contact with a thread of her life bond sword's presence. Cultivators and their life bond sword had a wondrous connection. Just now, her body resonated with energy, and she sensed the existence of her life bond sword. However, this feeling only existed for an extremely short moment before she cut it off. A lost life bond sword resonating again could only mean that her life bond sword was being controlled by someone else. If it was controlled by someone, the connection between her and her life bond sword could allow the controller to sense her existence and even capture her general location. So even though she had an indescribable desire for this life bond sword, in this moment, she decisively cut off her connection with her sword. The people of the Zhao sword furnace never lacked the courage to cut off their wrists. But for the cultivators of the Zhao sword furnace, their sword was their life. If they lost their sword, as long as it still existed in the world, they had to find it with their own hands. The metal pot floated in the roaring flames. The fish soup inside was immediately dried up, and the meat was burned to charcoal, giving off a noxious smell. Zhao Si did not sense it and looked back at Chongling. Just now, in this moment, she could at least sense that her sword was in Chongling. Deep in the Chongling imperial palace, clean light shone softly from the courtyard under the refraction of the crystals. It shone on the spirit lotus pond. The spirit energy was faint and did not seem to belong to the mortal world. Zheng Xiu, whose features were so perfect she did not seem to belong to a mortal woman, had an indescribable rhythm in the depths of her eyes. Even the spirit lotuses in front of her seemed to tremble in fear. Her brow furrowed deeply. In her perception, the life bond sword of the Zhao sword furnace was still floating in the sky, wrapped in the pale white star fire, and being tempered and changed. She was just cultivating normally, and did not purposely use this sword to search for Zhao Si's existence. She did not want anyone to know that this sword was in her hands, including Zhao Si. Zhao Si's reaction was very decisive, so she was not sure if this life bond sword had formed a connection with Zhao Si, but she clearly sensed a strange presence. She once again clearly sensed that someone's presence during cultivation had created a subtle disturbance in the primal energies of the universe she came into contact with. The heaven replenishing divine art had always been the most mysterious and powerful method of Min Mountain Sword sect. She only knew that the heaven replenishing divine art was powerful, but she did not know the contents of the heaven replenishing divine art. Also, in the subconscious mind of any cultivator, the heaven replenishing divine art could not be quickly comprehended. So she had never connected this change to the wine shop youth. She just faintly felt that a cultivator with a unique method had appeared in Chongling. And this cultivator, she was very displeased with him. A letter was sent by Min Mountain Sword Sect and ended up in a room in Chongling's Guangzhong Guild Hall. One of the advisors looked at the old shopkeeper signing and stamping without any hesitation and found it hard to understand. He couldn't help but frown and ask, "Young master, this letter is of great importance." "Head shopkeeper, do you not need to ask old master?" The old shopkeeper was very steady in his work. He was not in a hurry to reply. First, he firmly stamped the card and then took out several red cards. Looking at the slightly burnt end of the red invitation cards, the cautious advisor's expression completely changed. Even his voice changed. "Shopkeeper, old master has specially instructed that young Master Dingming's matter is the most important matter of the Xie family. So this has nothing to do with young master's intentions." The old shopkeeper motioned for the advisor to grind ink for him and said, "This is old master's intentions. Old master and the Xie family owe him a favor." The advisor was dumbfounded. The old shopkeeper couldn't help but look up and laugh. He said, "While young master did not enter the top 10 in the Min Mountain Sword Trials, he defeated the top talent on the Book of Talents with young Master Shen. Even now, he is still able to stay in Min Mountain Sword Sect. Eldest Miss entered the top 10 of the Min Mountain Sword Trials. How many years has it been since anyone in Guangzhong did this? Which of the people who entered Min Mountain Sword Sect before were not disciples of marquises or nephews of generals in the army?" After a pause, the old shopkeeper's smile grew prouder. Which person from Guangzhong is not proud of the Min Mountain Sword Trials this time? This time, the Xie family is requesting them to work together. Which one of them will not help? The advisor took a deep breath and wanted to say something. The old shopkeeper looked at him meaningfully and said slowly, "Business has its own profits and losses. No matter if it's a loss or a profit, what matters in the end is face, reputation, and how many people you fed. If you can't even repay kindness, how can you continue doing business in the long run? Why should you care about temporary gains and losses?" "You are right." The advisor immediately realized and bowed respectfully. Then he started to grind ink. A carriage with a round black roof slowly moved through the streets of Chongling towards the Zhou family ink garden. Looking at this carriage, even the black-robed astrology bureau officials who were responsible for guarding along the way could not understand why someone of bureau chief Ye's status would come to ink garden twice in just a few days. The black carriage suddenly stopped when it was 100 feet from the gates of Ink Garden. A handsome black-robed official of the Astrology Bureau quickly walked to the side of the carriage. He bowed deeply to the carriage and reported in an extremely low and fast voice, "Just an hour ago, the Guangzhong Xie family sent a scorched-tail letter asking for help from the large merchant associations of Guangzhong, asking for their help in purchasing the celestial demon vine and wolf poison flower. The celestial demon radish greatly stimulates the minds of cultivators and temporarily increases the flow of their energies. But too much will cause hallucinations. The wolf poison flower is a fire poison. If eaten with too much energy, it is easy to have ulcers and rot. I do not want to listen to this nonsense." Yi Seeling's cold and powerful voice sounded clearly in the carriage. "You should know what I want to know." The young Astrology Bureau official immediately sweated and said even more respectfully, "We only found that Xie Changxing sent a letter from Min Mountain Sword Sect. The deeper reason is still being investigated. Go." The words came out of the carriage in an unusually simple manner. The black carriage continued to move towards the gates of Ink Garden. The young Astrology Bureau official immediately lowered his head and left quickly as though he had been pardoned. No one stopped him. Xiao Sharon, who was still sitting on the bamboo mat, did not even look up. as the black carriage passed through the outer garden and neared Ding Ning's small courtyard, the door curtains silently swung open. Dressed in white robes, Yi Siling sat silently in the carriage. She looked at the quiet ink garden in front of her with a gaze full of emotion. While he was just an heir, they were going to meet again. Chapter 354. Ding Ning stood at the entrance to the courtyard, waiting for her. In this world, the hardest thing to understand was the human heart. On the stormy summer day last year, Ding Ning had looked at her from afar. Just like Zhao Zhan had seen that day, she still did not fit in with Changling, yet he still did not dare to be certain of her feelings. Until Bai Shanshui came with her presence. Yi Siling quickly saw the figure of the youth in indigo robes standing at the entrance to the courtyard in the deepest part of Ink Garden. She thought that she would be very excited or moved, yet she found that she was very calm. She gave a self-deprecating smile, showing 2 faint dimples. She had waited for too long. Revenge had become her life, and did not seem to have much to do with other people. Also, success or failure could not change what had already happened. Revenge was just for pleasure. Pleasure came from the mind, and the process of revenge from what she wanted to do, and had nothing to do with the result. Seeing Yi Siling come out of the carriage and walk towards him with a serene expression, Ding Ning's mind suddenly became even calmer and more peaceful. He sensed her pleasure and her clear conscience. Then he thought of what he had done. No matter what the result was, he had a clear conscience. Looking at her white dress and her beautiful face that was no longer young, Ding Ning could not help but smile. "Hello, you are very good." Yi Siling also smiled. These 2 simple sentences contained a lot of her emotions. Then she did not waste words. She looked at Ding Ning and asked in a normal tone, "An hour ago, the Guangzhou Xie family sent a scorched tail letter. All the rich families in Guangzhou and the cultivators who came out of Guangzhou will collect the wolf poison flower and the celestial demon vine. This should be your doing. What do you want to do?" Ding Ning looked at her and said in a calm tone, "I want to kill that palace attendant." Yi Siling was not shocked and smiled brighter. "How?" Ding Ning said, "I want to force her to agree to a duel with me. Min Mountain Sword Sect will help me think of a way. With the help of the Astrology Bureau, this matter will be much simpler." Yi Siling did not even think and said with a smile, "This matter is very simple. A palace attendant is also a person, and she has a lover." You know, Ding Ning was slightly surprised. Yi Siling glanced at him. Palace attendant Rong is not an ordinary person. It is not strange that I know. Then it is even simpler. Ding Ning smiled like he was talking about a trivial matter. "I have the 9-death silkworm and the heaven-replenishing divine art, the celestial demon vine, and the wolf poison flower can make my energies stronger. With the 9-death silkworm, my cultivation speed will be fast, and I will not be harmed by the poison of these 2 medicines. The heaven-replenishing divine art can nourish my body and eliminate the negative effects of the 9-death silkworm. The heaven-replenishing divine art is a perfect complement to the 9-death silkworm, so you must enter Min Mountain Sword Sect." Yi Siling thought of the person who had always wanted to enter Min Mountain Sword Sect, but had been rejected. He could not help but shake his head and sigh inside. "Also, I have a cultivation method I obtained from White Goat Cave that can be used as a disguise." Ding Ning also sighed and said, "The heaven-replenishing divine art is too mysterious. No one outside knows what kind of method the heaven-replenishing divine art is. In Min Mountain Sword Sect, even if they are shocked at my cultivation speed, they will only think that it is a problem with the 3 corpses non-self-consciousness sutra that I accidentally obtained from White Goat Cave. It is fine if you do not kill, but if you do, you kill Zheng Xiu's people. In the last decade of Changling, it has always been her who wants to kill people, but no one dares to kill her people. Yi Siling sneered and said, "What next?" "Next, we will kill Liang Lian and then break into the great floating water prison." Ding Ning looked at her, put away his smile, and said seriously, "Then we will leave Changling. Then we will enter Realm 8. Then we will kill our way back." Ding Ning looked up at her bright eyes and said slowly, "This is my entire plan." Yi Siling laughed and said, "It sounds like a beautiful plan." Ding Ning said, "I hope it is very beautiful." "I hope it is very beautiful," Yi Siling repeated with a smile. Then she took out a white jade bottle from her sleeve. The white jade bottle carried the warmth of her body. It was filled with a black golden medicinal liquid, so thick it looked like it would solidify. "My plan is similar to your plan." Looking at Ding Ning, she said slowly with a thread of satisfaction, "With the Xie family covering for you, no one will think that your sudden increase in cultivation is related to me. After all, there are more people keeping an eye on me than on you." After a pause, Yi Siling looked at Ding Ning and said, "I will try to do as little as possible for you, because as long as I do something, there may be traces left behind. People may detect our connection." Ding Ning was silent for a moment and said, "I understand. Then we will meet again." Yi Siling sneered and turned to walk towards the black carriage not far behind her. Even from the side, one could clearly see the two beautiful dimples on her face. "Goodbye." Ding Ning looked at her back and said softly. She did not ask him about the inheritance, where and when it came from. He also did not ask her why she did not appear where she should have been in the past. Everything had a reason. The past was not important. What was important was the beautiful future they hoped for. He held the small but heavy white jade bottle in his hand and walked back to his bedroom. Then he simply poured all the medicinal liquid in the white jade bottle into his mouth. A rumbling sound came from his body. The medicinal concoction was like countless stars shooting out from his body, carrying with it a terrifying power. But at the same time, countless silkworms came out of his body and surged towards these flying stars. Countless star-like drops of medicinal juice were continuously consumed by the silkworms. Then, these silkworms fed back an astonishing amount of qi, which passed through his meridians and gathered in his energy sea, becoming more and more condensed vital essence. His mind and consciousness seemed to merge with his vital energy. The two seemed to merge into one. Stars seemed to flash in his vital energy. His cultivation was rising at an astounding rate. At this speed, he feared that in less than a day, he would be able to go from Realm 4 not long ago to Realm 4 second-class cultivation in the cultivation world. At this time, Ding Ning was certain that when he passed Realm 4 second class, there was still a large amount of medicinal energy in his body that flew like stars. This kind of cultivation increase was too simple, but this was the accumulation of Yi Siling's more than a decade of life and death battles overseas. It was simple, but how could it be simple? Chapter 355. Time gradually passed. Day and night changed. Changling had entered its hottest season. The little courtyard in the deepest part of Ink Garden was silent. It was clearly daytime, but the light of countless stars, or rather, the energies of the universe that had fallen from an unimaginable distance, were condensed into sticky essence by an invisible power. In the end, they flowed along some fixed paths and entered Ding Ning's body at a constant speed. Ding Ning's body emitted billowing hot air and even formed billowing colorful clouds behind him, just like the saints in the legends. His skin seemed to turn to jade and gave off a glossy light. What was most frightening were the rustling sounds coming from his body, like countless silkworms gnawing on mulberry leaves. The primal energies of the universe that gathered into his vital energy from the surroundings had completely merged with his vital energy. In his perception, the vital energy flowing through his body was like a silver liquid, translucent as it passed through his meridians. The stronger and more condensed vital energy was constantly changing his body, including his perception. In reality, it was not that the invisible mental power was strengthened in the short term, but as the primal energies of the universe were absorbed, it was like a person traveling in the darkness, holding a torch that grew brighter and could see more places. Seeing was knowing. The vital energy that had rejected the primal energies of the universe outside his body started to perfectly merge with the primal energies of the universe inside his body. This meant that he had truly crossed realm for second class. When the vital energy was stronger, it could store in the seal scripts for a long time without dissipating. With a thought, one could move the vital energy to flow through the seal scripts and drive the swords. This was the next realm 5. For ordinary cultivators, it would take many years or even half a lifetime to cross from realm 4 second class to realm 5. But Ding Ning only used a fraction of a summer to complete this process. Amidst the chirping of the cicadas, a young woman dressed in plain robes and carrying a long sword slowly walked out of an alley facing Ink Garden. Her body was very light, and she made no sound when she walked like a cat, so she did not attract much attention. But when Xiao Sharon, who was sitting cross-legged on the mat, raised his head, he was stunned. The young girl nodded at Xiao Sharon from a distance, and then passed through the open gates of Ink Garden, walking straight into the depths of Ink Garden. Her cultivation and age naturally couldn't surpass Xiao Sharon's, so she was naturally Xiao Sharon's junior. In all of Chongling, the only person who could have such presence in front of Xiao Sharon could only be the next sect master of Min Mountain Sword Sect, Jing Liuli, one of the 2 strongest monsters in Chongling. Because the other party was someone who was valued by her master just as much as she was, and she respected the other party greatly, Jing Liuli released some aura that she would not normally release before approaching the small courtyard. A gust of cool wind blew in front of her, and many cool crystal lights appeared in the clear sky. Like tiny water droplets, they reflected and refracted the colors of the sunlight, forming a small but beautiful rainbow. Ding Ning had sensed her arrival long ago, but after she slowly released her aura, he pushed open the door and walked out of his bedroom. He walked out of the small courtyard to greet this young girl who, if not unexpected, would be the next sect master of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Seeing Ding Ning appear in her sight, Jing Liuli, who had a hint of arrogance and coldness on her face, also nodded in greeting. Ding Ning bowed in return and asked, "Why have you come?" "If there is a letter to send, there will be a reply. Your friend, Xie Chongxing, prepared a reply letter and some things for you. I brought them over." Jing Liuli looked at Ding Ning and said, "At the same time, I came to learn from you." Ding Ning stilled and couldn't help but laugh. He said, "What qualifications do I have for you to learn from me?" Jing Liuli glanced at Ding Ning and said gravely, "I do not have such ability to go from Realm 4 to Realm 4 second class in such a short time." Ding Ning's expression immediately grew serious, and he frowned slightly. "What method do you cultivate that you can sense the true progress of cultivation?" Jing Liuli did not evade and said directly, "I cultivate the cold mountain snow." Ding Ning raised an eyebrow, but before he could speak, Jing Liuli added, "My sword is the snow reflection sword." If it was someone else, they would not be able to understand the meaning of her words, but Ding Ning understood. Being able to see the true cultivation of others, especially vital energy, is the key to defeating the enemy. He glanced at Jing Liuli and said calmly, "In reality, other than cultivation, I also need to learn some other things from you." Jing Liuli looked at Ding Ning and said coldly, "Master thinks that I am too simple. Too simple. I am not qualified for the position of sect master. Looking at Jing Liuli's presence as a sect master, and then at Jing Liuli's solemn expression, and hearing her speak of simplicity, Ding Ning could not help but laugh. Do not find it funny. Jing Liuli frowned slightly and said gravely, for example, in the matter of killing palace attendant Rong, I need to learn from you. Min Mountain Sword Sect has a rebellious disciple. Min Mountain Sword Sect wants to clean out the sect, but he holds an important position in court and is highly valued. If we kill him, my master will have a hard time explaining to the Yuanwu Emperor. Also, that person is very shameless and lives in seclusion. He does not accept any cultivator's invitation to duel. Even if I want to publicly challenge him, he will not accept. If I want to kill him, it will be the same situation as if you want to kill that palace attendant. Sect Uncle Xiao gave you a suggestion, and you immediately felt that the suggestion was feasible and could do it with great confidence. Then I can learn from you and see how you do it. Ding Ning looked at this serious and stern young woman and grew silent. The next sect master of Min Mountain Sword Sect was the responsibility that Bailey Sushua had given to this young woman. People who dared to take on the responsibility usually had the spirit of sacrifice. This is Xie Chongqing's letter, and the things he asked me to bring to you. Jing Liuli took something out of her sleeve and handed it to Ding Ning. She said with slight disdain, the Xie family even sent a scorched tail letter for you. What he gives you is not very useful. The things in Ding Ning's hands were very simple. A sealed ordinary letter, a fiery red pearl that flashed with light, and a small seal carved from a golden shell. Ding Ning calmly opened the letter. The writing inside was very messy, but the person who wrote it clearly worked hard and cheerfully. The brush moved quickly and with great force. The writing was also very simple. I have already arranged for the matter you mentioned. You can do things with money. Take my seal and go to any business of the Xie family to withdraw money. If they are stingy, you can pawn my night fire pearl. That was left to me by my grandmother. Let's see if they will spend a lot of money to buy it back. Ding Ning did not deliberately conceal it. Jing Liuli did not deliberately avoid it, so she saw most of the writing on the letter. She immediately sneered and said disdainfully, a rich playboy is a rich playboy, exuding the aura of wealth at any time and place. Ding Ning did not directly respond. He looked calmly at her and said, you should have heard the story of the pillars of Chongling. Jing Liuli frowned and said, what pillars of Chongling? Even you have never heard of it. Many things worthy of respect were destroyed like this. Ding Ning shook his head and looked at the distant sky of Chongling. He said slowly, in the past, official Shang abandoned the laws and changed the system. Almost no one believed the things he said. He found a piece of wood that was easy to erect and issued a reward. He said that anyone who could erect that piece of wood would receive 1,000 pieces of gold. At the beginning, no one tried because they felt there was a trap. Later, someone tried and easily erected it. Official Shang really rewarded them with 1,000 pieces of gold. After that, everyone knew that official Shang was a man of his words, and the new system was quickly implemented. Jing Liuli's expression grew solemn, and she did not speak. Ding Ning glanced at her and said, the other aspect of this matter is that there will be brave people when there is a great reward. Also, we cultivators do not care about money, but most people in Chongling who rely on money to live care. Jing Liuli's frown slowly relaxed. So, you mean that money is very useful? If a person is good at using money, it is also a kind of ability? Ding Ning nodded, smiled, and said, Xie Chongqing is the best example. He values money the most, but at the same time, he values money the least. squanders money like it is water. But he can win many things like the help of others, retainers, and friends. Jing Lioli thought of how that person had shamelessly stayed in Min Mountain Sword Sect and found it hard to have a good impression. Her gaze darkened. So large amounts of money are very useful for you to deal with that palace attendant. Ding Ning took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He said seriously, "Everything is ready." Jing Liuli's eyes narrowed slightly, and a sharp light shone out of her eyes. "Then what do you prepare to do?" Ding Ning turned to look at the high wall of ink garden that he had destroyed. Many residences had been built there, and the people who lived there were the neighbors of Falling Parasol. He said slowly in somewhat crude but honest words, "In a person's life, the most basic is eating, drinking, defecating, clothing, food, shelter, and transportation." Chapter 356. Jing Liuli was puzzled, but thinking that Ding Ning would do this in front of her, she did not think more. She said slowly, "While I do not know what past you have with the Xie family, Xie Chongsheng fears that the Xie family will not dare to pay more. He worries too much. The Xie family scorched tail letter is a letter of gratitude. They want all the Guanzhong people who have received the Xie family's favor to help. They will not be stingy with money. He worries too much, but at least he values friendship more than anything else." Ding Ning looked at the fiery red pearl in his hand and said seriously, "This is one of his most shining qualities." Jing Liuli frowned slightly, thinking of that person's performance from the Min Mountain Sword trials to now. She felt that Ding Ning's words were not unreasonable. Ding Ning smiled inexplicably. He looked at Jing Liuli, who was dressed in the most ordinary robes, and asked, "Why are you not wearing the robes of Min Mountain Sword Sect?" "If I wear the robes of Min Mountain Sword Sect, people will easily guess who I am. Not because of my cultivation, but because of my identity. Not many people dare to provoke me. If I attract too much attention, it will be inconvenient to do things." Jing Liuli glanced at Ding Ning and said, "Also, no one will complain about having too much true battle experience." Ding Ning laughed again. "In a place like Chongling, it is easy to cause trouble and fight, as long as you do not dislike me for using you then." Jing Liuli raised an eyebrow, and her expression grew serious. "Since I am learning from you, I will be your student in this period of time. Naturally, I will do whatever you want me to do." Ding Ning thought and said, "You can help me dig soil and plant flowers." Jing Liuli glanced at him and asked crisply, "Where do I dig, and what flowers do I plant?" Ding Ning looked at her and smiled. He said, "Your sword is too eye-catching and too sharp. You have to put it away." If he was too casual, he would not attract attention. No one would have thought that a genius like Jing Liuli, who was extremely important to the future of Min Mountain Sword Sect, would enter Chongling alone without a carriage or an accompanying teacher. In the information of everyone, especially the truly important people of Chongling, Jing Liuli was always accompanied by Yantai Guanjin, the fastest of Min Mountain Sword Sect. In their view, Tantai Guanjin was always by Jing Liuli's side, not to teach, but to protect. Jing Liuli had her own means of concealing her whereabouts. So even people like Palace Attendant Rong, who had eyes in many corners of Chongling, did not know that Jing Liuli had left Min Mountain Sword Sect and entered the Zhou family ink garden alone. Palace Attendant Rong's daily life was not as monotonous as that of ordinary palace attendants. From a certain point of view, she was like a shadow of Empress Zhengxiu, alone while that moved through Chongling. She needed to frequently enter the imperial palace. Sometimes she even had to go to Jiaodong Commandery to take care of some relatively secret matters. So she was not in the palace most of the time. She usually lived in Sky Radish Alley in the south of the city, Most of the people living in the alley were the family members of the palace. Her courtyard couldn't be considered large, but it was in the best location in this alley. Not far from her courtyard was a living spring, and the courtyard she resided in was the first residence to reach the upper reaches of a clear stream formed by this living spring. Her attendants had served her for many years and knew the preferences of this important person of the palace. She knew that this important person of the palace liked iced drinks after waking up early in the morning. So in the hot summer mornings, she would go and get some spring water to make lotus seed soup or mung bean soup to calm the heart, and then add some ice to cool it down. In the summer, after washing up early, she would drink a bowl of iced drink and then eat some fruits and vegetables. This was palace attendant Rong's habit for many years. The habit became second nature. Before the sun rose, palace attendant Rong meticulously washed up and walked into the courtyard. She sat under the grapevines and lifted the bamboo cover covering the breakfast. When her hand touched the bowl of clear mung bean soup, her brows unconsciously furrowed. Without waiting for her to speak, the originally worried servant girl reported in a low voice, "What a coincidence! The Li Ji ice house in the southern part of the city is closed, and the ice house in the western part of the city that is further away has sold out, so the ice used for the ice is hard to find." When a habit became natural, it would cause people to feel uncomfortable when it was broken. Also, palace attendant Rong knew what it meant for an ice house that could supply many wealthy families for a summer to be sold out. It was too easy for her to connect this to the Guangzhou Xie family scorched tail letter. Spending so much just so I can't drink a bowl of ice mung bean soup. There was no anger on her glowing porcelain face as she slowly picked up the bowl of mung bean soup that had been cooled with spring water. A scornful smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. The heads of these Guangzhou people are interesting. A bowl of iced mung bean soup could at most make her unhappy for a while. In her view, it would not affect anything. Yet, just as she spoke scornfully and picked up the bowl of mung bean soup to drink, her nose moved slightly and her brow furrowed. "What is the smell? Why is it so smelly?" The maidservant beside her subconsciously covered her mouth and nose and said in a muffled voice of disgust. Many curses came out of this quiet alley, and the sound of doors being pushed open. Palace attendant Rong was a powerful cultivator, so she did not need to go out to know what had happened. Multiple caravans were passing through the nearby alleys. The alley the caravan was passing through was located upwind. The caravan was transporting ordinary goods, but due to the hot weather, these horses naturally gave off an unpleasant smell. More of the stench came from the dung bags behind each horse. The smell of the horse dung in the dung bag seemed to have caused the grapes growing on the grape trellis in the courtyard to smell like fermentation. It made people unconsciously feel that their bodies were starting to smell like they had been soaked in overnight rice and turned rancid. When palace attendant Rong heard more curses, her gaze darkened and her expression grew ugly. Those people who pushed open the doors to negotiate with the caravan would not have any results. Because those caravans didn't have any problems, even the stinking dung bags were a necessity in the city. The purpose of the dung bags hanging behind each horse was to hold the horse dung that the horses spat out during their journey to prevent the horse dung from randomly scattering on the streets. The streets the caravan passed through were the caravan's normal paths. The residents of the surrounding alleys had no reason to stop the caravan's advance. But even more importantly, there would not be many caravans passing through here at this time. The most important thing was that the feces excreted by the horses were exceptionally smelly. It was obvious that they had eaten some special fodder. To be able to boldly buy all the ice in an ice house, they naturally could have caravans pass through here from time to time. These were naturally just shameless little tricks that affected her mood. Yet, not long after the Xie family sent out the scorched tail letter, such things started to happen. This meant that all of these actions were targeted at her. After a long moment of silence, she looked up and stopped the attendants who were preparing to go out and argue with the caravan. She had the attendants prepare the carriage. Since the Empress had personally promised her safety, she knew that as long as she did not agree to the duel with Ding Ning, she did not have to consider her safety. She knew that if these Guanzhong people became shameless, they would have many unimaginable moves. Even if she solved the present problem, there would be more new problems. Since they did not want her to peacefully eat breakfast here, she would change places. Changling was so large. Could these Guanzhong guests fill it up with caravans? She walked out of the courtyard and boarded the carriage. Nothing unexpected happened. The carriage left this smelly alley and started to move towards some secluded alleys. There were many elegant eateries in this small alley. However, before her carriage had even officially entered this alley, a man wearing a short gown, looking rather straightforward, had already passed by one shop after another. At the same time, he paid the shop owners the equivalent of several days' worth of profits, only for these shops to close today and not do any business. Some of the customers who dined in these shops also received generous compensation, and they were all very happy. The only unhappy one was this palace attendant Rome. When her carriage entered the alleyway, it had become even quieter. Almost all the shops had closed. She was like a plague. All the places she passed seemed to have become dead zones. The sunlight was strong, and the heat was tempting. When the carriage driver started to feel at a loss, she said after a moment of silence, "Go to Happiness Tower." Happiness was on her face. Happiness Tower was one of the most famous restaurants in Changling, and that restaurant belonged to Jiaodong Commandery. She did not believe those people from Guangzhou could stop her from drinking in this restaurant. The carriage driver was very familiar with the location of the restaurant. The carriage wheels seemed to become light again. When they passed a stone bridge not far from the restaurant, the wheels jumped up slightly as though they were about to fly. But at this time, palace attendant Rong, who had calmed down in the carriage, suddenly looked up. She heard the sound of hooves. The places she had passed before were like dead streets swept by a plague. But at this time, the streets she was passing through suddenly became very busy. Many horse caravans appeared in the surrounding alleys. These caravans seemed to be in a hurry to get on the road. Therefore, in the next short period of time, the road around her carriage was completely congested. Countless noises could be heard from the horse caravan. Each horse had a sack of dung behind them. The dung in the sacks gave off a pungent smell. She seemed to be in a dung heap. At this time, she seemed to sense something and looked out through the cracks in the curtains. That was Happiness Tower. There was a youth in ordinary robes standing behind the railing. He looked at her coolly, like he was looking at the scenery. He held a bowl of iced soup covered in condensed water droplets. Chapter 357. Most of the young talents of Changling did not dare to look down at her like this, much less that bowl of iced drink. So this youth could only be Ding Ning. Palace attendant Rong narrowed her eyes slightly. She looked for a few breaths and then got off the carriage. She was a powerful cultivator. The horse caravan blocking her carriage could not stop her from moving forward. She appeared to be strolling, but she was like a breeze. She easily walked out of the clogged horse caravan and walked towards Happiness Tower without a speck of dust. Perhaps it was because she was intentionally showing off her cultivation, but a lustrous ball of light even appeared around her body. Not only did it isolate the filthy stench, but it also isolated the heat of the summer. No one stopped her. She went up the tower until she was behind Ding Ning. There was wind at the top, and the horse caravan slowly dispersed after she left the carriage. There was no longer any stench. Ding Ning did not immediately turn around. Her gaze first landed on Ding Ning's back, and then on the bowl of iced drink in Ding Ning's hand. A scornful sneer appeared at the corners of her mouth. She slowly said, "As expected, it is a bowl of iced mung bean soup." Ding Ning did not look at her. He slowly drank the bowl of iced mung bean soup, and then allowed the bowl to fall down the stairs with a crisp crack. As palace attendant Rong's eyebrows rose slightly, he turned around and looked calmly at palace attendant Rong. He said, "Even if it is made by Happiness Tower, the taste is not very good." Palace attendant Rong did not show any anger. She looked calmly at Ding Ning and said, "If you just want to vent your anger, you do not need to go through so much trouble. If you really want me to apologize, I can never drink this iced mung bean soup. The person is dead. What is the use in apologizing?" Ding Ning looked at her and shook his head. He said coolly, "I am not like senior sect brother Zhang Yi. I am more realistic. The so-called glory is true glory when people can see it. In the end, I just want the old man to be happy. What is the meaning in a grand funeral now?" The old man tolerated and gave in his entire life. His final wish was to watch the entire sword trials. But you even want to cruelly deprive him of his last bit of time. You are just a palace maid. Ding Ning smiled and said seriously to palace attendant Rong, "You think I just want to vent my anger?" Palace attendant Rong's gaze turned cold. "You are just a palace attendant." She had heard Ding Ning say this during the Min Mountain Sword trials. But when she heard Ding Ning say it this time, she had a completely different feeling. "You want to force me to fight you and then kill me?" She was silent for a moment, then raised her head and looked coldly at Ding Ning, saying, "I will not agree to your request for a duel. It is not that I feel you have enough power to kill me, but I will not go against the Empress' decree." Palace attendant Rong slowly said, "You have proven after the Min Mountain Sword trials that you are a genius on par with Jing Liuli and Bao Shi. In the future, you will be a pillar of the Qin dynasty. So even if I can kill you now, I will not act. As long as the Empress appreciates you, I will not accept your request for a duel." Ding Ning smiled and said, "I heard you have a cat with slightly blue fur. It is very rare and very obedient. Just an external object. If you like it, I will send it to Ink Garden today for you to do as you please." Palace attendant Rong smiled coldly and shook her head. She said, "What you do is of no use to me. I can return to the palace. Even if I stay for a long time, your tactics cannot be used in the imperial palace. Also, the major families of Guangzhou cannot help you without limits." Ding Ning put away his smile and looked at her. He said, "What is most annoying about you is that you are too confident and superior. Even if you apologize, you do not have any sincerity. Even if you were given a chance to do it again, you would still do the same thing. If I do not kill you, I will not be happy. My eldest sect brother, who was forced away by you, will not be happy. My junior sect brother Shen Yi will not be happy." Palace attendant Rong's gaze grew colder, but before she could say anything, a shout came from the nearby street, and then there was the thunderous sound of hooves. In the blink of an eye, a galloping horse with red eyes charged down a long alley. With a loud bang, this mad galloping horse collided with the horse pulling the carriage in front of Palace attendant Rong's carriage. When the two collided, the two galloping horses spilled blood, and their brains splattered on the ground. The carriage driver who was driving the carriage for Palace attendant Rong paled and gave a shout. He was almost thrown out of the carriage. The rider of the galloping horse flipped and landed on the ground. Then he bowed apologetically to the carriage driver and said the horse was frightened and caused such a disaster. I will compensate. Naturally, this was not a coincidental accident. Ding Ning did not disguise it. Looking at the bloody scene of blood and brains flying, he looked calmly at palace attendant Rong and said, "We cannot be happy, so we will not give you happiness. As long as you do not fight me, such things will happen. You will not even have a carriage in Chongling. You can only walk back to the imperial palace on your own. Fortunately, it is not too far to walk." Palace attendant Rong's gaze turned completely cold. She said, "So what you are most unhappy about is the departure of your eldest sect, Brother Zhangyi. You have to understand, any cultivator in Chongling must listen to the decrees of the entire Qin dynasty. You are all citizens of the Qin dynasty. As you cultivate to become stronger, you must clearly understand who you are working for. Otherwise, no matter how talented you are in cultivation, you are seeking your own death. You think too highly of yourself." Ding Ning looked at palace attendant Rong and said slowly in a calm manner that could easily drive people crazy, "You are just a palace attendant. In the eyes of most people in Chongling, I have absolute reason to challenge you. I have been in Chongling for decades, experienced countless things, and seen all kinds of storms. I want to see what methods you have to force me to accept your challenge. Also, since you want to make trouble for me, I will naturally make trouble for you. This is a very fair matter." Palace attendant Rong did not speak and turned to leave. It appears that she does not fear your threat. When palace attendant Rong's figure disappeared from the street, Jing Lily, dressed in plain robes, appeared behind Ding Ning and said sternly as he looked in the direction palace attendant Rong had disappeared. Ding Ning nodded and said, "Of course, she will not be afraid of these tactics. But as time passes, her mentality will change. She will start to feel conflicted that she should have agreed to fight with me earlier. In the end, this conflict and anger will easily cause her mentality to lose balance." Jing Liuli was slightly puzzled and said, "Why will her mentality change and conflict that she should have agreed to fight with you earlier?" Ding Ning smiled and said, "Because she will find that my cultivation is constantly increasing. My cultivation is quickly growing stronger." Jing Liuli's eyes lit up slightly. She seemed to understand Ding Ning's meaning. Ding Ning glanced at her and said, "What I need to do next is to let her know that my cultivation is quickly growing at a terrifying rate." After a pause, Ding Ning smiled and said, "Fortunately, she also said she would make trouble for me. I need to let her know that my cultivation is growing quickly, so there is no need to be so deliberate." Jing Liuli nodded and asked humbly, "Then what about her old lover?" Ding Ning said, "That is the straw that breaks the camel's back, so do not touch him for now. This will encourage her to meet him more and obtain more comfort from him." Jing Liuli thought carefully for a moment and said, "I understand. Let's go to her residence." Ding Ning said and started to go downstairs. Jing Liuli followed behind him and asked softly, "What are we going to do?" Ding Ning said, "To get her cat." Jing Liuli frowned slightly and was slightly puzzled. Ding Ning turned to look at her and said, "There are some things that the enemy doesn't seem to care about, but it doesn't mean that they really don't care. And even if they really don't care, when you take away their things one by one, they will still feel a little uncomfortable." Jing Liuli's brows relaxed, and she nodded. "Are we going to kill her cat? Why would we kill it?" "Just take care of it." Ding Ning smiled. Being uncomfortable for a long time is naturally more uncomfortable than being uncomfortable for a short while. Jing Liuli thought for a moment and said, "Then why don't we get her old lover to fall in love with someone else?" Ding Ning laughed involuntarily and said, "Fall in love with someone else? Don't tell me you want her old lover to fall in love with you, Jing Liuli said seriously. If it works, I can give it a try. Ding Ning looked at her serious expression, and then looked at her immature but dignified aura. His smile became brighter. Forget it. I don't think that person has such good taste. Kill the cat in my house. In a place where he and Jing Liuli could not see, a middle-aged man in yellow robes appeared in front of Palace Attendant Rong, who was walking alone. Palace Attendant Rong walked past him and said softly and coldly. Chapter 358. Ding Ning and Jing Liuli walked down Joy Tower and boarded a prepared carriage. Ding Ning sat in the carriage. Jing Liuli sat at the front of the carriage and started to drive. She had left Min Mountain Sword Sect to learn from Ding Ning. In this period of time, she thought of herself as Ding Ning's student. Since her attitude was like this, she appeared very natural when she did these things, while she had the same appearance at the Min Mountain Sword trials and did not disguise herself. Very few people had seen her during the trials. Also, the naturalness of her driving for Ding Ning became the best disguise for her identity. No one would have thought that the next master of Min Mountain Sword Sect, the legendary genius Jing Liuli, would drive for Ding Ning. Along the way, anyone who looked at this carriage intentionally or otherwise thought that this simple young woman was the attendant that Wang Taishu had arranged for Ding Ning, or one of Ding Ning's junior sex sisters in White Goat Cave. Jing Liuli was not familiar with the streets of Chongling, but Ding Ning knew them like the back of his hand. As she listened to Ding Ning's directions and Ding Ning's introduction of these streets, she couldn't help but frown slightly. She thought, if she fought with Ding Ning in the streets of Chongling, she would be slightly weaker than him and lose the geographical advantage. Seeing her frown and sensing the change in her presence, Ding Ning knew that she was thinking about cultivation. So he couldn't help but say softly with emotion, "Only those who are obsessed can reach the peak. You were born obsessed with cultivation, and everything you see is cultivation. Even if your talent is not as good as it is now, it will not be something ordinary people can reach. But I still fear that I will not be able to catch up to you in the future." Jing Liuli responded calmly. When she said this, she didn't raise her head, only calmly looking at the road ahead. However, when she said this, she suddenly raised her head. Thunder rumbled on the stone path ahead. A horse was pulling a carriage, and it was galloping towards the carriage that she and Ding Ning were in. The carriage wasn't carrying an ordinary carriage, but several buckets of dung. For cultivators, there was enough time to react between hearing the sound and the actual impact. Jing Liuli's eyes narrowed slightly. Behind her, Ding Ning said softly, "Palace Attendant Rong's methods." Jing Liuli raised her eyebrows slightly. Ding Ning continued, "Stop the carriage, otherwise the feces will spill all over the ground. Our carriage will also stink when it passes by." Just as this voice rang out, a gust of wind blew past Jing Liuli's body. The carriage was already slightly lighter, and Ding Ning's figure had already gently floated out of the carriage. Jing Liuli naturally thought that Ding Ning was right, but until Ding Ning flashed past her, she had not thought of how to deal with this. It was easy to kill a horse, and it was easy to separate the horse from the body of the carriage. However, looking at the shaky appearance of the dung bucket, it was extremely difficult to prevent the heavy horse and the carriage from overturning no matter what method was used. In this moment, Ding Ning attacked. The people on the two sides of the road moved out of the way. They looked chaotic, but in reality, there were many pairs of eyes looking solemnly at Ding Ning's performance. When Ding Ning attacked, these calm and cold eyes were filled with shock and incomprehension. Ding Ning stabbed forward with the last flower remnant sword in his hand. Countless fine, white flowers bloomed on the blade. Then the front of the sword split into countless fine threads. These tiny sword threads flew out like white hairs, each of them still blooming with fine white flowers. There were many beautiful flowers flying in the air, each blooming with unique primal energies of the universe. This was not just a pure vital energy presence. Vital energy had perfectly absorbed some primal energies of the universe. This was at least the middle level of Realm 4 energy fusion. How many days had passed since the Min Mountain Sword trials? At the time, Ding Ning had just entered Realm 4, and he had been seriously injured during the Min Mountain Sword trials. Now, his injuries had healed, and his vital energy cultivation was Realm 4 second class. How was this possible? But this was not the only thing that shocked and puzzled them. When the sword threads of the last flower remnant sword in Ding Ning's hand spread out, a glowing stream of water flowed out from the front of each thread. Each sword thread seemed to become a willow branch in a pond. Then when the wind blew, they sprayed out glowing streams of water. Countless streams of water pierced into the body of the mad steed. The steed was still galloping forward, but its momentum was becoming slower and slower. Ding Ning swung his sword. At the same time, the horse almost stopped, its hooves powerlessly falling forward. Ding Ning's sword light cut through the reins, belts, shafts, and everything else that could be connected to the carriage. Just like that, he cut them in half. The horse fell to the ground. The carriage behind it swayed slightly, and then completely stilled after Ding Ning's sword slapped down. Jing Liuli had stopped the carriage long ago. Her carriage was dozens of feet away from the horse, and the dung carriage behind it. It is not easy to raise a horse, and it is not its fault. Since you have the ability to stop the carriage, why kill the horse as well? She asked softly, but seriously. Ding Ning turned and walked back to the carriage. He said, "It has been fed the crimson stone powder. It cannot live. It will only increase its pain." Jing Liuli's brow furrowed deeply. "You can make so many judgments in an instant. I should learn from you." Ding Ning looked calmly at her. He pointed at an alley next to the carriage and said, "Go there. Go around this section. It will not waste much time." Jing Liuli's expression was stern, but at least she appeared calm. She did not say anything else and obediently drove into the alley. A fresh and sweet fragrance entered her nose. There were many gardenias planted on the two sides of the alley. The snow-white flowers were blooming beautifully. Thinking of the distance just now the horse had fallen, Jing Liuli knew that Ding Ning had deliberately controlled it. She took a deep breath and said, "Even if just now I can think of a sword move as quickly as you in terms of the use of sword moves, I am still not as good as you. In my view, sword moves only need to be used well. There is no need to care about absolute perfection." Ding Ning looked at her back and said seriously, "There is no absolute perfection in the world. Also, opponents cannot have an absolutely perfect response." Just right, but not absolute perfection? Jing Liuli pondered the meaning of these words. Her brow unconsciously furrowed deeper. She felt the truth in these words deeper and deeper. The carriage gradually moved away from the eyes that were staring at Ding Ning. However, the shock in those eyes was still expanding, terrifying when one thought about it. This was what these people were feeling right now, other than Realm 4's second-class cultivation. The first move was Cloud Water Palace's 1,000 water coil. This move originally needed many preludes to be used. It was a sword move similar to a sword formation. Yet Ding Ning just used the last flower sword's characteristics to use this move. This kind of execution was not just an excellent performance of a sword move, but a kind of innovation. Other than this move, the next move was a break and a slap. His control of power was just right. To be able to use sword moves to such a level, This was more terrifying than just the improvement of vital energy. A realm 4-second class challenging a realm 6. This seemed to be an act of seeking death. Yet, inexplicably, many of these people started to worry about palace attendant Rome's safety. The flower-scented alley was very quiet and washed away all murderousness. There were very few pedestrians, but Jing Liuli's hand instinctively fell to her side. That was where the hilt of her sword should have been, but at this moment she touched nothing but air. Her sword was not there. Never have any habitual behavior, especially when using the sword. Any habitual behavior is a fatal weakness. Looking at Jing Liuli, who had realized some problems, Ding Ning said calmly. His and Jing Liuli's gazes landed on a porter by a well at the entrance of the alley. That porter looked normal, just using cold water to wipe his body. But Jing Liuli, and he knew at the same time that this person was not an ordinary porter. There is something wrong with the way he is holding the cloth. Jing Liuli nodded slightly to show that she had learned. At the same time, she turned to ask Ding Ning, "How did you see? The wear on his carrying pole does not match his figure." Ding Ning glanced at her and said, "There are many porters in falling parasol. His shoulders cannot wear out the kind of wear on his carrying pole." So this was what it meant to see the unusual in the ordinary. Thinking of the progress Zhang Yi had made in the ordinary wells, Jing Liuli was thoughtful. "He has no murderous intent." Ding Ning said softly, "Let's just go through normally." Jing Liuli was puzzled. Any cultivator who wanted to ambush, especially an assassin, would hide their murderous intent. Why was Ding Ning so sure that the other had no true murderous intent right now? At this time, a soft and condensed voice reached her and Ding Ning's ears. Palace attendant Rong rarely has weaknesses. What you have seen is not her weakness. Chapter 359. This voice naturally came from the cultivator, who looked like a porter. However, looking at his appearance, he was still wiping sweat, as if he wasn't talking to them at all. Jing Liuli looked at this cultivator, who was behaving strangely. Her eyebrows rose, and she was about to speak when Ding Ning's voice sounded behind her. "Do not ask, just listen." Jing Liuli's gaze flashed slightly. She did not speak and continued to drive the carriage forward. In other words, many of her weaknesses are feigned. Her cat was already dead when you arrived in her courtyard. She ordered it to be killed. She is as cold as the Empress. This coldness is not only shown to others, but also to herself. It's the same for her old lover. Even if you torture her old lover in front of her, it's useless, because people like her always love themselves the most. In this world, in Chongling, she only fears one thing, the Empress. Her only weakness is the Empress. If you want to deal with her, you have to find where she hid something or was disloyal to the Empress, even if it was fake. As long as these things are exposed, she will become more and more terrified. She will worry that your continuous exposure will cause the Empress to be dissatisfied with her. Then she will agree to fight you and want to end this matter. Jing Liuli's brows furrowed into a deep frown. Only when the carriage left the alley and the cultivator who looked like a porter stopped speaking did Jing Liuli speak softly. "This person seems to be reasonable," she said softly. Ding Ning nodded and said softly, "It is reasonable, and he is not an ordinary person. He knows a lot. He even knows that palace attendant Rong has an old lover." Jing Liuli thought of this, and her gaze darkened. "Can you guess the identity of this person?" Ding Ning said calmly, "Most likely he is someone close to the Empress like this palace attendant." Jing Liuli turned her head and looked at Ding Ning sternly. "How do you know?" "The matter of palace attendant Rong's lover is extremely secretive. Even your Min Mountain Sword sect does not know. Only the Astrology Bureau knows. In all of Chongling, only the Divinity Bureau and the Empress know as much as the Astrology Bureau. Ding Ning glanced at her and indicated for her to focus on driving the carriage. At the same time, he slowly said, "Also, you did not notice his tone and address. Every time he mentioned Zheng Xiu, he called her Her Majesty the Empress, and his tone was very respectful. The people of the Divinity Bureau have always been cautious and will not cause trouble, much less have anything to do with me and Min Mountain Sword sect." What Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu hated the most was that the Divinity Bureau and the Astrology Bureau, who supervised the officials, were in cahoots with others. If someone from the Divinity Bureau dared to do such a thing, they wouldn't be so respectful in terms of address and tone. Jing Liuli was silent for a moment and said, "I have many things to learn from you. But since he is also someone close to the Empress, why did he help you deal with Palace Attendant Rome? Is he purposefully making a move?" "We will know if he is purposefully making a move when we try." Ding Ning looked at her humble appearance and couldn't help but laugh. He said, "As to why someone close to the Empress would help me deal with Palace Attendant Rome, I do not know the reason. I cannot know everything." Jing Liuli thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Then she asked, "Palace Attendant Rome has been like the Empress' shadow in these years. Could she have been disloyal to the Empress? If so, why didn't that person say so if he wanted to help us? It may be a suspicion, but not a certainty. But as long as there is a suspicion, it is possible to find out." Ding Ning looked at Jing Liuli and said, "The other even said something like her old lover. He believes that with our abilities, we would know this already. So he may feel that there is no need to mention it, and we can find out. Also, it is not hard to create something out of nothing. At least, he is right about one thing. It reminded me." After a pause, Ding Ning said seriously, "Her greatest fear is Zheng Xiu. Only when it involves Zheng Xiu will she be in her greatest fear. Even more importantly, Zheng Xiu loves herself the most. She is most familiar with and understands Zheng Xiu, so she will be more terrified." Jing Liuli turned to look at Ding Ning and said, "You also seem to understand the Empress." Ding Ning said calmly, "I have heard enough stories. Also, I do not know where my eldest sect brother Zhang Yi is." The carriage came closer to Palace Attendant Rome's residence. A clear scream of a cat was heard. In Palace Attendant Rome's courtyard, the attendant who usually served Palace Attendant Rome held a pair of scissors. Her body trembled, and she was about to cry. Her body was splashed with blood. On the ground in front of her was a cat with faint blue fur that had not completely died and was still convulsing. Just like many mornings in the past, Zhang Yi woke up at the first rooster crow. Without any delay, he got up, dressed, folded his blankets, and started to wash. Even when they were in the inn, they were still very meticulous. The conduct of a gentleman was not based on external objects, but on the heart. Some things puzzled him. From the Qin to the Yen, no one had arranged for him, so he had to follow the caravan around the Chu and Yen borders. But when he reached the Yen, even in the border villages, there were people who received him and arranged his food and lodging until he was led to the Yen capital. Right now, there was a carriage parked outside the inn he was staying in. This carriage would take him to Celestial Seal Sect today. In the open space in front of Celestial Seal Sect bathed in the morning light, many young students from all over the Yen dynasty had gathered. The cultivation places of the Yen dynasty were not as concentrated as those of the Qin dynasty, so these students who came from all over were travel-worn. Celestial Seal Sect was publicly recognized as the strongest sect in the Yen dynasty. In the entire world, Celestial Seal Sect held an important position. For many years, At least 7 out of 10 of the most famous cultivators of the Yen dynasty came from Celestial Seal sect. After a simple breakfast, Zhang Yi, carried by the carriage, came to the gates of Celestial Seal sect. He looked at the seemingly crude grass huts on the mountain, and then at the black wall outside the gates that was inscribed with the writings of many powerful cultivators of the Yen dynasty and even emperors. He naturally felt awe, and then shame. He felt that the sword path he cultivated did not seem to match the seal path of Celestial Seal sect. Now, more than half of the students in front of Celestial Seal sect were intoxicated by the writings on the wall. Yet, he felt that the presence of the writings was too distant, like they were floating in the sky. He did not just worry if he could keep up with the young geniuses of Yen after entering Celestial Seal sect. He even worried if he could pass Celestial Seal Sect's exam. As to why Celestial Seal Sect's exam was being held at this time, he subconsciously thought it was a coincidence. Yet none of the travel-worn students thought the same as him. Because those students had come half a month early, Celestial Seal Sect's exam had been delayed for half a month due to unknown reasons. He was like all the other students. No one from Celestial Seal sect seemed to pay attention to him in advance, but his whereabouts were constantly reported to a grass hut in Celestial Seal sect. There were 3 old people in this grass hut. One of them was the old man he had taken care of in the caravan. Senior sect brother, you really decided to take him as a direct disciple? Hearing the other old man's question, the old man shook his head emotionally and said, Junior sect brother, you have asked the same question 3 times. The old man with a thin face and hair with faint indigo energy also shook his head and said, asking 3 times at different times, I thought senior sect brother might have changed your mind. The old man sighed softly and did not respond. He had made up his mind. The other old man, with white eyebrows, slowly raised an eyebrow and was about to speak. Senior sect brother Yuan, you are most skilled in balance and harmony. You know that everything needs to be balanced, but this has nothing to do with balance and harmony and owing someone a favor. The old man looked at the old man with white eyebrows and shook his head. He looked at the morning light outside the grass hut and said softly, because all of this cannot stop true love. I truly like the character of this Chongling youth. The old man said gently and patiently, this is the most important reason I want to take him as my disciple. The old man with white eyebrows smiled helplessly and said, Junior sect brother, you are the master of a sect. Since you have made up your mind, we do not need to say more. The old man smiled in satisfaction and said, a gentleman is like jade, not divided by territory or group. At least, a person like this will not fail our efforts. In the morning light, the other 2 old men accepted this old man's true love and were infected by his joy. Outside Celestial Seal sect, Zhang Yi, who could not merge into the ink on the wall, was attracted by the chirping of birds. He looked up curiously and saw multiple magpies flying over from the top of the wall. Chapter 360. Seeing joy in the morning was a good sign. Zhang Yi did not know at this time that before the test started, he was fated to be the direct disciple of the master of Celestial Seal sect. Any weighing of the pros and cons, based on the present and future considerations, would not be able to stop true love. Love and hatred were the most intense emotions in the world. As expected, she is more vicious and difficult to deal with than we imagined. Jing Liuli stopped the carriage and said slowly to Ding Ning. A hint of coldness flashed through her stern eyes. She had heard the cats scream. She did not need to see, just from her perception. She knew what had happened in the courtyard. We have harmed this cat. Ding Ning shook his head, helplessly. Originally, I wanted to take it to Ink Garden and raise it. Jing Liuli turned and frowned slightly at him. She did not know if he was speaking the truth or just speaking casually, since she is so difficult to deal with. And someone is helping us. This plan needs to change. Ding Ning ignored her gaze and said with a bowed head, "Let's go to the south of the city." Jing Liuli nodded. She looked in the direction and started to drive the carriage. At the same time, she asked softly, "Why are we going to the south of the city?" Ding Ning said, "To find her old lover." Jing Liuli raised an eyebrow and said, "Did you not say to not touch him first?" Ding Ning was silent for a moment and said, "Zheng Xiu is cold and emotionless, but she is actually very tolerant. The only thing she cannot tolerate is someone taking over her private property." Jing Liuli turned to look at Ding Ning and said, "Why do you know the Empress so well?" Ding Ning said, "Do not stray too far from the topic. As to why I know her, you will know in the future." Jing Liuli frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "You said that what she cannot tolerate the most is the possession of her private property. What does this have to do with us meeting this palace maid's old lover in advance?" Ding Ning looked at her back and said calmly, "Overstepping your authority also means using her private property. Using cultivators without her permission is also taking over her private property. If the cultivators die because it is not her intention, that is something she cannot tolerate." Palace attendant Rome had followed Zheng Xiu for so many years. It was impossible for her to take cultivation treasures that were useful to Zheng Xiu or hide some information. She would not dare. But she was someone who could speak to Zheng Xiu. Everyone in Chongling knew that her status was above most court officials. She only needed to express some attitude when she wanted to do something. Therefore, after so many years, she must have unintentionally made some mistakes because of her power. She might not dare to do it intentionally, but it's hard to avoid it unintentionally. Her old lover has been with her for so many years, and I think he knows many things about her. Jing Liuli thought with a dark expression and said, "What you say is reasonable, but even if her old lover knew, why would he tell you? In Chongling, even I cannot abuse the law." "You are thinking in the wrong direction. The sword is usually the last solution to a problem," Ding Ning said softly, "since even the other people around the Empress know that this palace maid is also cold, then her old lover will know. People's emotions may be blinded by a moment of passion, but after a long time, they will become rational and easily see their true nature. Even if her old lover truly liked her at the start, when he saw her clearly, I fear that they were mostly using each other and relying on each other." Insecurity. After a pause, Ding Ning looked at her back and said seriously, "He will feel insecure. What we need to use is his insecurity. The sword is usually the last solution to a problem. In your own sect, you cannot use the sword at any time." Jing Liuli looked down. She thought of how her master had killed someone right under the eyes of the Yuanwu Emperor during the Min Mountain Sword trials. She said slowly, "Following you, there are always gains." Ding Ning looked at her and said softly from the bottom of his heart, "I only hope that I will not lead you onto the wrong path." Jing Liuli said coldly, "The path is born from the heart, whether you are on the wrong path or not. You cannot blame others even if you are on the wrong path." Ding Ning did not say anything else and nodded ahead. Turn right on the main road ahead. Chongling was very large. Carriages could not travel quickly through the streets and alleys. So even though Ding Ning pointed to the shortest path, Jing Liuli's carriage only arrived at a tea garden in the southern suburbs of the city at noon. The tea garden was not on the slope, but beside a mulberry field next to a river port. Those tea leaves looked plump, but in the eyes of many rich people who liked tea, they were not worth a mention. So these tea leaves were usually picked from the tender leaves at random. They were casually fried and sold to the roadside tea shops regardless of the season, especially the big bowl tea shops on the two sides of the official road. The rougher the taste, the better the taste of tea. A bowl of herbal tea would quench the thirst of those who stopped by. The people of the tea garden were skilled in using what they produced as much as possible. So when Ding Ning and Jing Lioli arrived at this tea garden, a refreshing tea fragrance mixed with oil floated out from a bamboo hut inside. Ding Ning sniffed and smiled slightly. He said, "Old tea stew's old goose." Jing Lioli glanced at him and did not express any opinion. "Eat first." Ding Ning smiled. Then he did not let her walk ahead and walked straight to the bamboo hut. There was a simple stove made of stone outside the bamboo hut. On the stove was a black iron pot in which a chopped-up old goose was cooking. The old goose had been cooking for a long time, mixed with some thick tea leaves. The soup was like sauce, glistening with oil. However, the tea leaves seemed to have absorbed a lot of the oil, so it did not look greasy. A tall, middle-aged man in plain clothes was sprinkling garlic in order to make the final seasoning. Looking at Ding Ning and Jing Lioli, who were walking straight over, and feeling the aura of these two people, he could not help but freeze slightly. "Eat." Ding Ning did not say anything unnecessary. He just said these two words, and then he took two wooden stools from the side, two sets of bowls and chopsticks from the side table, and some water to wash them. Then he sat down in front of the middle-aged man, with the pot between them. He filled a bowl with rice from a jar beside him, and filled a bowl for himself and Jing Lioli. Then he picked up the bowl that the middle-aged man had already put aside, and filled a bowl for him. Seeing Ding Ning's actions, the middle-aged man only frowned slightly, but did not speak to stop him. Only when Ding Ning picked up a piece of goose meat to eat did the middle-aged man ask gently and politely, "How is the taste?" "While it cannot compare to the chef's outside, it has a different flavor." Ding Ning smiled and said, "Even more importantly, this goose is truly old." The middle-aged man's expression eased. He did not speak and just ate. After a bowl, he looked at the empty jar and asked, "Do you want to cook some more rice?" "All right, we can discuss some matters while cooking." Ding Ning nodded and looked at the middle-aged man, who was always gentle and polite. He said, "No wonder palace attendant Rong likes to come to your place for so many years. You are slightly unusual. You do not ask why she comes and goes and are casual and at ease. This will make someone like her, who has too many things on her mind, feel comfortable." The middle-aged man had started to wash the rice. Hearing Ding Ning's words, shock appeared in his eyes. "You are Ding Ning?" Ding Ning bowed and said, "I am Ding Ning of White Goat Cave." The middle-aged man took a deep breath and continued to wash the rice. At the same time, he put a handful of washed wild vegetables into the pot with the old goose. He said hesitantly, "Why do you have to be so ruthless?" She was the one who was ruthless first. Ding Ning looked at the middle-aged man and recovered his usual calmness. He said, "Even if she only wanted Old Man Shui to see the final result, I would not be so ruthless now." The middle-aged man skillfully took down the iron pot and let the temperature of the iron pot cook the wild vegetables that had just been put in. He put the jar of rice on the stone stove and said sincerely, "But it's useless for you to find me. Even if you kill me, it won't be of any use. You should be more important to her than her cat." Ding Ning shook his head and added some firewood to the stove. Looking at the new fire, he said, "I only showed some thoughts of dealing with her cat, and she ordered the cat to be killed." The middle-aged man sat down and grew silent. "The problem now is, do you think she will do anything to ensure you will not be harmed by me?" Ding Ning looked at the silent middle-aged man and said calmly, "If you think she will, then you can stand firmly on her side." Looking at the middle-aged man, who was still silent, Ding Ning paused for a few breaths and then asked seriously, "If I don't do anything today, just eat 2 more bowls of rice from you, and then leave, do you think she will think that nothing happened between us? Chapter 361. This middle-aged man with a calm temperament was silent for a long time until the pot on the stone stove began to emit steam. Then he looked up at Ding Ning and said, "The problem is you want to kill her, and I have told you some things you want to know. Will she die?" Ding Ning looked at this middle-aged man called Zhang Luyang. Seeing the subtle changes in his eyes, he said seriously, "It is very simple now. Do you want her to die or not?" Hearing Ding Ning's words, Jing Liuli, who had been sitting quietly like a servant girl, suddenly looked up. She suddenly realized that she might have misunderstood Zhang Luyang's previous words. Zhang Luyang looked at Ding Ning and said, "I must confirm if you have the ability to kill her." Ding Ning smiled and reached out to move his chopsticks. Zhang Luyang's expression changed slightly. His fingers had just moved when Ding Ning's chopsticks changed direction and pointed below his right rib. Seeing Ding Ning's 2-minute movements, Jing Liuli's expression grew grave. "I heard that you comprehended the sword manual with a glance at the Min Mountain Sword Trials. Your comprehension of the sword manual is not something ordinary people can imagine. Seeing you today, I have never seen you use the sword and your vital energy cultivation progress." Zhang Luyang looked at Ding Ning's chopsticks and took a deep breath. He said seriously, "You are just Realm 4 second class, challenging a Realm 6. Is this too hasty? I will pass Realm 5. Ding Ning skillfully pressed down on the firewood in the stove and said naturally, "When I reach Realm 5, I will be able to use a flying sword. If I can use a flying sword, it will not be hard to kill her." An indescribable grimace appeared at the corners of Zhang Luyang's mouth. He said, "How long will it take?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "Not long, before this summer ends. You have been with her for so many years. Do you really want her to die so much?" Before Zhang Luyang could say anything, Jing Liuli couldn't help but say in a cold voice, "It's not that I want her to die, but she will definitely kill me." Zhang Luyang shook her head emotionally and said, "Because I'm also her secret. Now that you know of my existence, she won't allow such a secret to continue existing." Jing Liuli could not understand. She frowned and asked, "Is this considered a secret?" "Of course it's a secret." Zhang Luyang smiled emotionally. "Before you found me, I thought that no one in Changling would know that I had some sort of connection with her. Can't palace maids have lovers?" Jing Liuli looked at him in confusion. "Even if they get married and have children, what's the problem?" After saying that, Jing Liuli noticed that Zhang Luyang and Ding Ning were looking at her with strange expressions. "What, did I say something wrong?" Jing Liuli looked strangely at Ding Ning and Zhang Luyang. Ding Ning smiled and said, "If the matter of marriage is built on the basis of true love, then there is no problem. But if this person is only used to relieve her loneliness and is just a place where she can temporarily not think of other things, then what you said has no meaning." Jing Liuli's brow furrowed deeply. She was silent and seemed to understand. She naturally has many difficulties by the Empress side, but if the Empress knows that she does not feel safe following the Empress and needs a place to comfort her, then this matter should be a secret. Zhang Luyang smiled bleakly and said, "I was originally an ordinary swordsmanship teacher in Qingyang Sword School. I was indifferent and did not like to fight for fame. So I rented a tea garden and lived here in seclusion. When I first saw her, I thought we were truly in love, but after interacting with her for a long time, I found this was not the case." Jing Liuli's expression was still ugly. She knew Zhang Luyang's meaning, but she could not completely agree. Even if the present was different, this man had at least truly liked that palace attendant. Could he be so ruthless as to have that palace attendant die? Actually, just like you feel that you can learn some information from me, she will think that I know many things that I should not know when I am with her. When she is awake, she will not say, but when she is asleep, she will worry that she will talk in her sleep and let me know something. Zhang Luyang saw Jing Liuli's meaning and smiled self-deprecatingly. She has come more often in these years. I do not know if it is because she needs more comfort or because she is worried about me. Also, she may know too many things that she cannot mention to anyone, so she will talk in her sleep. Looking at Jing Liuli, who suddenly raised an eyebrow, Zhang Luyang shook his head and said, in her dreams, she will threaten me and say things about wanting to kill me. Then why do you not leave her? Jing Liuli reflexively said, but when the words came out, she knew her words were unnecessary. If I want to leave her, she will be worried. Then I may be buried in this tea garden. But Zhang Luyang still answered her question. His hand landed on the boiling pot. A gentle wave of primal energies of the universe came out of his palm and covered the pot, sealing all the steam that leaked out. When the entire pot was about to explode, he lifted the pot and put it on the table. Then he smiled faintly at Ding Ning and Jing Liuli and said, the rice is cooked. Add another bowl of rice. Only now did Jing Liuli remember her role. She took Ding Ning's bowl and helped Ding Ning scoop rice. Min Mountain Sword Sect can guarantee your safety. If you are willing, you can leave Chongling at any time. Ding Ning looked at the rice grains that were clearly glowing and full after a cultivator's work. He scooped up a spoonful of goose soup and poured it over the rice. Then he said seriously, what secrets can you tell us about her? In reality, the palace attendant that the Empress liked the most was not her, but a palace attendant with the surname Huang. Zhang Luyang took the rice that Jing Liuli had scooped for him and slowly ate. He said slowly, but that palace attendant revealed some things that she should not have, so she was sentenced to death. Jing Liuli wanted to speak, but this time she remembered her identity and Ding Ning telling her to speak less and listen more. So she came back to her senses and lowered her head to eat. That palace attendant revealed a secret about the Holy One 3 years before he ascended the throne. Zhang Luyang did not look at her and just looked at Ding Ning. He said, there was a time when the Holy One did not like women. At the time, the Empress was with that person. But the Empress disguised herself as another woman and had a relationship with the Holy One. The Holy One had no room to maneuver, and so the great change occurred. Even though Jing Liuli wanted to listen to the story, her expression changed immediately when she heard these words. This kind of secret was really too big. Ding Ning took a deep breath. He put down his bowl and looked at Zhang Luyang. He said slowly, so palace attendant Rong used another palace attendant to spread the news? Zhang Luyang nodded and smiled bitterly. Such a thing was almost written in a storybook. At that time, the Hongru Academy and the Dao One bookstore were burned down. Because of this incident, nearly 100 scholars were burned down. Just this one matter is enough. Ding Ning nodded and said, in reality, there is a flaw in this matter. So she thought about it day and night and mentioned it many times in her sleep. Zhang Luyang looked at Ding Ning and said softly, what she did cause the day palace attendant Huang revealed this matter. At that time, palace attendant Huang was meeting with someone. That person can be a witness. But that person did not know that palace attendant Huang's death was related to the burning of the Honghua Academy and the Dao One bookstore. He did not know what happened back then, and palace attendant Huang did not know what time the clues pointed to. At the time, the investigation files would not be kept in any bureau. However, the Empress' memory is very good, and this matter is very deep for her, so she will remember all the details. That person is Mo Shouqing. She does not have the ability to set a trap to kill someone of such status, so this has always been a knot in her mind. By the time Zhang Luyang finished speaking, Ding Ning had already finished his bowl of rice. He looked at Jing Liuli, who had half a bowl of rice left. He stood up and bowed slightly to Zhang Luyang. He said, "Thank you, sir, for your help." Seeing him bow and leave, Jing Liuli immediately stood to follow. After Zhang Luyang returned the bow, he did not see him out of the tea garden. But when Jing Liuli started to drive the carriage, and the carriage moved slightly, Ding Ning said softly, "He is lying." Chapter 362. Jing Liuli was still immersed in the abnormal love between Zhang Luyang and palace attendant Rong, and the secrets Zhang Luyang had revealed about the former Empress Zheng Xiu and the Yuanwu Emperor. When she heard Ding Ning's words, even with her calm heart, she could not help but tremble slightly. She said softly, "What do you mean?" Ding Ning glanced at the thatched hut in the tea garden and said simply, "He has too many flaws." Jing Liuli frowned deeply and said, "I do not see any flaws." Ding Ning said slowly, "The greatest flaw is that what he knows comes from palace attendant Rong's sleep talk. No matter how many secrets he has, how many Realm 6 cultivators have you heard of who would sleep talk at night?" Jing Liuli turned to look at him and did not speak. At Realm 5, the mind is like a spirit. Vital energy and primal energies of the universe nourish the body better than most medicines in the world. The soul is calm. If you sleep talk, I fear you will immediately wake up. How can you speak for a long time? Ding Ning said calmly, "When one reaches Realm 6 and nears Realm 7, the sound of wind and rain is like thunder in one's ears. One can clearly hear the movement of grass and insects in the distance. All abnormal reactions of the body are like lightning and thunder in front of one's eyes. Unless the cultivator has reached a certain realm, but is seriously injured or sick for many years, their soul will be weak, but you and I have both seen Palace Attendant Rong. Palace Attendant Rong's presence is calm, but due to her limited talent, she has not been able to reach Realm 7. How can she often sleep talk?" Jing Liuli's expression grew grave. She said coldly, "This is a great flaw. He is bullying us because we have not reached Realm 6 and feel that we do not know about Realm 6. Ding Ning looked up and said with a hint of coldness, "Just now, you have seen his cultivation. He is Realm 6. How can a Realm 6 not know about Realm 6? Using a shocking matter to shake people's emotions, it is easier for them to lose their usual judgment." After a pause, Ding Ning said slowly, he said that Zheng Xiu disguised herself as another woman and had relations with the Yuanwu Emperor, forcing the Yuanwu Emperor to mutiny. This is enough to shake people's minds. Also, what he said about the burning of the Great Confucian Academy is true and verifiable. People who listen to him will naturally be led down by him and think he is speaking the truth. This is the most common psychological attack. Many people, especially many generals, will use it when they command an army. Jing Liuli's expression turned cold. "You mean even this is false, regardless of whether the entire matter is true or false?" Ding Ning's calmness had a coldness that was not usually there. "At least some of the important parts are false. Even if we can let this matter reach Zheng Xiu's ears, this matter will have nothing to do with Palace Attendant Rong. Zheng Xiu will only feel that we are unscrupulous in making up things to humiliate her reputation for revenge. At that time, we will not have a good ending." Jing Liuli's hands tightened, and she could not help but want to stop the carriage. "Do not stop. Maybe he is looking at us." Ding Ning shook his head and said softly. Jing Liuli took a deep breath and continued to drive the carriage. Then she said, "So he does not want Palace Attendant Rong to die. He wants to help Palace Attendant Rong against us?" Ding Ning smiled and nodded. He still has a great flaw when I said that Min Mountain Sword Sect could protect him, and even revealed that he could enter Min Mountain Sword Sect to seek refuge. He was not happy, and his gaze was evasive. When we left, he sighed in relief, as though he had finished something. He did not even ask who would come from Min Mountain Sword Sect, and how we would arrange for him to enter Min Mountain Sword Sect. We have not confirmed these questions, and we have not arranged. He was not worried about matters of life and death. Jing Lioli was silent for a moment and said, "I understand what you say, but since you knew from the start that he was lying, you did not expose him. You were unable to get some of Palace Attendant Rong's secrets from him. Can you beat him at his own game?" "I cannot beat him at his own game." Ding Ning looked at her, a strange emotion flashing through his eyes. "But my conversation with him made me think of some things. I thought of a way to deal with Palace Attendant Rong." Jing Lioli turned to look strangely at him. "What way?" Ding Ning looked in the direction of the distant imperial palace and said coolly, "Right now, in Chongling, there are many things that only Zheng Xiu and Palace Attendant Rong know. If a third person knows these things, it must have been Palace Attendant Rong who revealed it. Even if this matter does not reach Zheng Xiu's ears, Palace Attendant Rong will be truly terrified." Jing Lioli looked in incomprehension at Ding Ning and could not speak. She was thinking, if only the Empress and Palace Attendant Rong knew about this. How could other people know about it? If other people knew, even if it was Forefather Zhou or old people like Shui Wangshu, how could only the Empress and Palace Attendant Rong know about this? You do not need to understand now. Since you are learning from me, if you remember these processes, you will naturally understand in the future. Ding Ning did not explain more. He met her puzzled gaze and said, "Zhang Luyang used such a shocking story to lure us in. He risked the danger of angering Zheng Xiu. He gambled on his own life. If he could do this, it means that he and Palace Attendant Rong's act was real and fooled everyone." Jing Lioli suddenly understood and said, "So Palace Attendant Rong and Zhang Luyang truly love each other." Ding Ning nodded and said with a hint of pleasure, "So it is useful to deal with Zhang Luyang. At the crucial moment, Zhang Luyang is a chess piece that can overcome her last line of defense." Jing Lioli was silent for a moment and said, "You seem to know these things from birth. In reality, you are more suited than me to be the next master of Min Mountain Sword Sect." Ding Ning glanced at her. This time, he did not respond. Not because of Jing Lioli's words, but because when he looked at Jing Lioli, he thought that Jing Lioli was very similar to a certain person in the past. The conversation stopped, but the carriage did not stop. From the slightly secluded tea garden, the carriage started to move into some of the bustling streets of Chongling. Ding Ning seemed slightly tired in the carriage and narrowed his eyes. Jing Lioli's gaze suddenly sharpened, but she hit it well this time. She did not look up and did not unconsciously focus on the sword at her waist. There was a large tea house ahead. At the door of the tea house, a youth in blue robes was walking out of the tea house towards her and Ding Ning's carriage. She still did not stop the carriage and continued to move forward as though she did not notice. When he was 100 feet from her, this handsome blue-robed youth's hand landed on his sword hilt. A wisp of faint sword essence emanated from his body. The dust in front of him slowly floated forward, and then formed a horizontal sword in front of the carriage. This was a clear meaning. Even the idle people on the two sides of the road and the tea house windows eating melon seeds clearly sensed this youth's meaning. This blue-robed youth was going to challenge the person in the carriage. Palace Attendant Rong's face gave off a porcelain-like light. Right now, she was walking back to the palace. While she did not stop for even a moment, news of Ding Ning's matters constantly reached her ears. She knew of the dung cart that had crashed towards Ding Ning. She also knew that Ding Ning had gone to the tea garden. She also knew that a blue-robed youth was going to challenge Ding Ning. Her face didn't seem to have changed much, but some cold flames were slowly burning in the depths of her eyes. That dung cart, including this blue-robed youth, everyone in Chongling would quickly think that this was her signal. Yet she knew that this had nothing to do with her. Then who was doing this? Was it Ding Ning himself, or the important people of Guangzhou? She could not understand. What she didn't know was that there was a high-ranking officer in a tea house on another street not far from the blue-robed youngster. He was dressed in ordinary clothes and was enjoying the scenery. Chapter 363. The blue-robed youth stopped Jing Liuli's carriage with a dust sword. His name was very interesting. He was called Chun Fuchen. Seeing Jing Liuli stop the carriage, the blue-robed youth bowed slightly towards the carriage behind Jing Liuli and said, "This one is Chun Fuchen. I want to challenge Ding Ning." When Chun Fuchen slowly released a wisp of sword essence and stirred up the dust on the road, the pedestrians on both sides of the road had already sensed the extraordinariness of this blue-robed youth. When they heard the name Ding Ning, there was an uproar and exclamations. While the Min Mountain Sword Trials had ended many days ago, Ding Ning's name was so resounding that it immediately stirred everyone's emotions. The one in the carriage is that wine shop youth from Falling Parasol. Inside is the winner of the Min Mountain Sword Trials. Ding Ning? Many people exclaimed in shock, their gazes unconsciously attracted to the seemingly ordinary carriage. The curtains of the carriage opened outwards. Ding Ning walked out. When the surrounding people saw this calm-looking youth and the broken sword hanging at his waist, countless cries of surprise rang out, sweeping through the surrounding streets like a wave. Ding Ning winning the Min Mountain Sword Trials was only a legend for the people of Chongling. No matter how astounding his skills were, they could not see it with their own eyes. Now, someone was challenging Ding Ning on the street. For them, this was a chance to see Ding Ning attack with their own eyes. This was a grand event in the marketplace. Ding Ning looked calmly at this blue-robed youth, who was full of fighting spirit, and did not immediately respond. Jing Liuli frowned slightly. She said in a voice only she and Ding Ning could hear, "You have to decide early whether to fight or not. Otherwise, the shops here will collapse. This is not a question of fighting or not, but how to deal with him." Ding Ning's gaze remained on the blue-robed youth. In a voice that only the two of them could hear, he slowly said, "There are many choices when using the same attack. Is it to directly kill the other, to seriously injure the other, or to force the other to abandon the sword and admit defeat? This is a question you must consider when you become the master of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Since you take me as your teacher and learn from me, in my view, this is one of the most important things you need to learn." Jing Liuli was slightly vexed. She thought it was just a competition of swords. Why was it so troublesome? Yet she felt Ding Ning's words were unusually reasonable, so she controlled her emotions and said softly, "Then what should I do?" "The things in the tea house he walked out of are very expensive. Ordinary people can't afford it. Although he walked out of the tea house wearing luxurious clothes, his expression and behavior were somewhat restrained. Instead, he seemed relaxed when he walked out. This shows that he didn't come from a rich family. Look at his face, hands, and feet. His skin is a little rough, unlike the children of noble families who usually have all kinds of nourishment and maintenance." When he called himself Chun Fuchen, his tone was very natural and calm. This means that this is his true name. His cultivation is very high, but his true name is not famous in Chongling. This means that he came from another commandery. Look at his eager gaze. Even his face has the urgency of wanting to become famous. Looking at all of this, We can generally judge that he is a youth of ordinary birth who has cultivated hard in another commandery for a long time and desires to become famous in Chongling. He did not know the power of Chongling and was used by others. Ding Ning said softly, and then said to Jing Liuli, after understanding this, "It is up to you how to use your sword against him. You have to understand that when you use your sword in Chongling, you cannot just consider which of the two swords in front of you is stronger." Jing Liuli's expression grew graver as she listened. She felt that she had overlooked too many things in the past, or rather, her identity as the next sect master of Min Mountain Sword Sect had caused her to overlook too many things. She did not seem to need to judge some things herself. Tantai Guanjian and the others would instill the results in her judgment. Regardless of whether I need to judge myself or not, I need to have my own judgment on some matters. She took a deep breath, nodded, and said. Ding Ning smiled and did not say anything else. When Ding Ning's lips curled into a smile, Chun Fuchen's eyebrows suddenly rose. His sword essence had been anxious and restless for a long time. The reason he could wait patiently for a while was because Ding Ning's calm gaze had an indescribable, intimidating effect on him. In his view, Ding Ning had become famous in the Min Mountain Sword trials. He was unknown and needed to step on Ding Ning's reputation to become famous. At this time, he was a junior and it was normal to wait. The other most important reason was that there were not enough people in the surrounding streets who had heard the news and came to watch the battle. To him, the more people who came to watch the battle, the more people who would spread his name in the future. At this time, the surrounding alleys were flooded with people. If he waited for a while longer, he feared he would not even have room to fight. His eyebrows rose, his lips parted slightly. The sword in his hand was raised slightly, and he was about to speak. But at this time, Ding Ning looked at him and said, "What right do you have to challenge me?" Once the words were spoken, the surroundings were silent. Suddenly, not a single sound could be heard from the chaotic streets and alleys. In the hot and humid weather, these people who had come to watch were crowded together. They did not feel any irritation and instinctively felt that Ding Ning was right. Chun Fuchen was slightly shocked. Previously, he had only felt that the cultivators of Chongling were proud. In all the rumors, the cultivators of Chongling were famed for their bravery and never feared any challenge. Avoiding a challenge would be seen as cowardly and despised. So he had never considered this question. My cultivation has reached realm 5. After a moment, he took a deep breath, looked at Ding Ning, and said what he felt was the most convincing reason. Cries of surprise rang out. There were many cultivators present. They knew what it meant for this blue-robed youth to reach realm 5 at such a young age. Yet Ding Ning's expression was still calm. He glanced at Chun Fuchen and said clearly, "So what? Some of my opponents in the Min Mountain Sword trials have passed realm 5. Chun Fuchen froze. Many cultivators present who felt that this blue-robed youth qualified to challenge Ding Ning were also stunned. If you want to challenge me, you have to have some reputation in Chongling. You are too hasty." But Ding Ning didn't give them much time to think. He looked at Chun Fuchen and continued, "If you can't even defeat my maidservant, what qualifications do you have to challenge me?" "What?" Hearing Ding Ning's words, gasps sounded. Chun Fuchen, and everyone's gaze focused on Jing Liuli. Chun Fuchen's body started to tremble slightly. He felt disdain and started to become angry. "What if I win against your attendant?" He took a deep breath, straightened his chest, and said directly, "Do you want to fight me next? If you can win against her, I will accept your challenge." Ding Ning smiled slightly and sat back in the carriage. His faint smile made Chun Fuchen even angrier. The flames of anger in his eyes seemed to burn. "Then I will challenge you first." He took a deep breath, looked at Jing Liuli, and said word by word. At the same time, he slowly raised the sword he had been gripping tightly. His sword was hidden in the wooden sheath. The wooden sheath was gray, and the patterns were unique like layers of feathers. His sword hilt was made of some kind of jade. At this moment, as the aura on his body surged, the light gray sword hilt seemed to have white clouds floating out. Hearing his angry and cold words, Jing Liuli's eyebrows did not even move. She looked solemnly and calmly at the dust sword on the ground in front of him, like she wanted to see a flower through the thin dust. At the same time, she said in a calm tone, "I accept your challenge." You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.